If you've seen the title, you know what we're talking about. We're talking about the Canon EOS R5. Yes, this is the R5. I've used the 5D in some of my thumbnails before when talking about the Canon R5 because I didn't have one at the time, but I do now. I did not buy this camera. This is a rental. I do recommend you rent things before you buy them just to make sure you actually get what you want rather than buying it and returning it or pre-ordering it and having to cancel. Like, you can always rent it, test it out, get your hands on it before you actually make the decision to purchase it. In any case, I rented this and I wanted to spend some time talking about just some of the initial discoveries I've had with the R5 compared to some of the other stuff that's out there. Of course, there's the overheating thing, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point, but that's not what this is about. This is just about those kind of first impressions, the initial discoveries of when you get a new camera in your hands and you go through the menu and you test it out, like what works, what doesn't, what feels familiar, what feels a little odd or off. I did something similar for the Lumix S1H when I rented that a few weeks ago and kind of tested that compared to where I come from, which is from the GH5. The GH5 is one of the cameras that I use most of the time. I also shoot with the Ursa Mini Pro, but oddly enough, as much as I sometimes criticize Canon, I do shoot with the Canon 5D Mark IV from time to time, and before that it was the Mark III, and before that it was the Mark II. At one point I owned a Canon 60D. Canon is very familiar to me for photography because at one point in time, hybrids weren't always the best. You couldn't get the best of both worlds in terms of photo and video. You kind of had to pick one or the other. So for video, in terms of that form factor, for like a hybrid style camera, I went with the GH5, but for professional photography, the GH5, from my perspective, just doesn't cut it. It's not quite there. So went with the 5D Mark IV. But now that the R5 is here, and this could be the perfect camera, but it's not, spoilers, it's not the perfect camera. We'll get to it. I want to talk about just some of my initial discoveries, being somebody who comes from that mindset of a real hybrid shooter who wants to be able to do both high quality video, as close to cinema as possible in a old school DSLR or currently mirrorless form factor, as well as someone who does photography as well, both for Instagram and professionally, all sorts of stuff. It really kind of runs the spectrum of the types of projects I work on. So for me, the R5 was very, very attractive on initial specs. A lot of people have been talking about it, why it's great, why it's awful, why there needs to be a recall. Is the overheating real? Is it not? I figured to know for myself, I just had to rent it. And yes, I did rent it and paid for it out of pocket. This isn't some freebie, handed out to me. It's like, no, I spent money to make that rental purchase and get it in my hands. So let's talk about that. Let's get to it of what we're dealing with here. As you can see, I've got my monitor set up here so we can kind of go through the menus. Yes, this is a live feed of the camera, so you can kind of see there what we're dealing with. But this is primarily for the menus. And the first thing I'm going to point out, you probably already know this based on the spec sheet, but it's just a good reminder. It is a micro HDMI port, which is not the greatest or most fun port to use in the world. I don't have a lot of micro HDMI cables lying around. Oddly enough, I had one that would work with this configuration, so thankfully I was able to dig that out and find it. But micro HDMI is not really my favorite. In any case, I can only show you the menu. I can't actually show you the on-screen text, which is annoying. And I'm gonna actually clear this out here from the Atomos, so there's not even any of those menus. So that way, hopefully it's just clean and straightforward. We can just talk about the menus on the R5. Because if you go over to the, let's see, where is it at? This is the one thing I don't like about the Canon system. People say the menus are fantastic. This is the same Canon menu that's been around forever. And like, you can get used to it. But first of all, why is there 3 things on page 1 and then a full page 2, a full-ish page 3, and then a short page 4? I assume these things are all somewhat related per page, but oddly enough, it feels like sometimes it just doesn't quite always make sense as terms of like what's on what page and why. In any case, that's beside the point. It's just the Canon menu seems like it needs to be updated, and there needs to be a little bit more rhyme or reason to like why this stuff is on. Like, why is overheat control and HDMI display and time code all on this page? it doesn't always make sense to me. Anyway, HDMI display. You can see that this is running 1.1 firmware. I should mention that this is the new updated firmware. But you'll see that like the only options for HDMI display are this option, which is the camera plus the monitor, but it says that the playback or menus are displayed only on screens of devices connected via HDMI. I think that's supposed to be the description for this icon, because this icon has nothing and that's just the monitor icon. It's a little confusing. I think this is just a slight bug in the menu that they just need to update with some additional firmware, but it's odd because I can't actually look at the menus here on the camera, which is why I have to look over here at the Atomos, which is really annoying. Even though it's supposed to be the camera and the monitor, both options just send signal to the Atomos and not to the camera itself. So that's a little irritating, which is why I kind of have to do this business where I'm looking over here, controlling the camera over here. It's kind of clunky and it's not quite perfect. You'll also notice that in HDMI display, there's no feed with information. It used to be that we couldn't get clean feeds on the Canon cameras. That was one of the big setbacks. You couldn't get a clean HDMI signal. They finally introduced clean HDMI signal, and we do have that now, which is I'm thankful it's there. But like you can on the EOS R and the RP, you can't actually send a signal with all the on-screen display stuff. So I can't show you my aperture and ISO and all my white balance settings. I'd love to be able to do that, but I can't. So all we're limited to is the menus, which is fine for now, I suppose. And all that could be fixed with firmware. It should be really easy. I don't understand why they're using the same menu that they've always had, and yet features are missing or just work differently than they do on other cameras. We should be able to do clean HDMI as well as, HDMI with the display information, because it is helpful in certain situations where you want to be able to communicate like what you're seeing on the camera, or at least record it externally so other people can see it. So I did think that was a little weird and kind of like a little bug right away, but not deal breaking by any means. This is specifically for this setup and kind of how I've got this all configured for this stream. But aside from that, probably not a deal breaker by no means. I will say that the R5 feels really good compared to the S1H. Having used that recently, big, bulky, kind of heavy, the R5 feels like the right size, at least for my hands, and coming from that kind of 5D background, things just feeling like they're in the right spot. Although I will say there are a few things that are missing for me. I really like having the white balance and ISO button right at your fingertip. That's not there anymore. Now it's just the scroll wheel, and you have a thumb wheel up here for your ISO, as well as, so you can do all your exposure configurations with the wheels. But it just, I like being able to like hit a button for white balance and just do that feature. Hit a button for ISO and just do that feature. And it's one of those nitpicky things that like I'll get used to over time of just playing with the camera. But there's a lot of stuff about like the 5D that feels really good that other cameras have copied, and then Canon has now moved away from. And I don't know if it's for the better or worse at this point, but it is a little odd. Some of those main buttons up by your kind of index finger that I'm kind of more comfortable with aren't there anymore, which is odd, but it's fine. Obviously, we have the record button up top. And then what's really annoying to me on this camera is that to switch between photo mode and video mode, you have to hit the mode button, and then you have to hit the info button to switch to photo and video, which is really just obnoxious to me. It's just kind of clunky, doesn't really make sense all the time of like why it's working that way. And I don't know. What happened to the nice wheel on top where you could switch between photo and video mode? Like why was that bad? To me, that's the fastest. I set this down for a moment and picked up the GH5 and was like so much faster just to switch between photo and video with just one little turn of the toggle. This is like a couple button presses. You're scrolling the scroll wheel. Maybe there's a way I can get it kind of more optimized with some of the custom settings, but usually I just like to switch between photo and video on the fly, and this is a little clunky and not quite all that great from my perspective. It just feels a little lacking, I guess, in terms of intuitiveness of just switching between photo and video, because that's what I would want to do with this. It's a hybrid. I'll also say one thing in the menu system that they have sort of nicely done is in the record menu, you can switch between all your different settings. So this is how you do it. You go up to, you can do 8K and you can do 4K, you can do full HD, and then a row down, you can do your frame rates, which is nice that this is all separated. And then of course you can do all I or IPB, and then RAW will also show up there if you're in the 8K mode. You can go down, oh, see, we're exposing the little thing that I was going to show you, which is good. So you'll see that you're in 8K, but you won't see RAW anywhere. And this is supposed to be an 8K RAW camera. And you wonder, well, shoot, why can't I do RAW? Where is it? Where is it? Well, this is the one thing. It doesn't even show up. It's kind of a little goofy. Anyway, if you go and you go back out, and I'll have to do this on the kind of live view mode. So you just have to take my word that I'm doing what I say I'm doing. There's actually in the menu, I think I can do it maybe. Let's see, where's that? I got to go back over here. See, it's just so clunky. I wish I could just do everything and just show you what I'm seeing on the camera. Wouldn't that be nice? But no, they took that away from the HDMI. Anyway, we're looking for stabilization. That's what we need to do. We need to turn the stabilization off, and then we can back out and go back over to page 1 and go, and now we have the RAW setting. But we still can't do it because you have to do 8K DCI instead of like the U, like Ultra HD. I think 8K Ultra HD or 8K. It's just the slightly wider aspect ratio. When you're in 8KD, and then you can go 2398, and then you can finally do RAW. So it's a very specific mode that you have to be in. Stabilization has to be turned off if you want to get RAW, which sort of makes sense. It's the raw sensor data. Okay, I get it. But it's just odd that it's not there, or it doesn't tell you how, like I had to play around and figure out, oh, I had stabilization on, that's why I can't access that feature. And then I don't think you can turn it back on if you are in this mode. Let's just see real quick. This is what I like doing with new cameras, just playing around in the menus. It's kind of silly and pointless and not as exciting as looking at photos and videos, but it is fun to learn how these cameras work from that kind of like the things you need to change on the fly all the time. So if we're back to, it looks like it probably disappeared. Is it gone? Yeah. So we can't do, not available because of the associated function setting, movie record quality. So we're in 8K RAW, so we can't do stabilization anymore. So for as good as the stabilization is on the R5, if for whatever reason you are expecting to get it in 8K RAW, you can't do that. But you know, any of the other modes you certainly can. So if we take that out of RAW, and by the way, this is a 256 gigabyte CF Express card, and you only get like, I actually could format this actually. Why don't we do that? Because let's go over to the wrench, and then it's a couple down, so we can format, and we'll see actually with a clear card how much space we actually could get 8K RAW. So 12 minutes with 256 gigabytes of data. Like that is insane and only applies to very certain situations. Now, 8K RAW Lite is supposedly coming, and we'll see what that kind of allows in terms of recording times, but 12 minutes for 256 gigs, probably not practical for most people. If you want to see, what like 4K, just like regular 4K Ultra HD, 23976, and then you can see between all I gives you about like an hour for 256 gigs, or IPB, which gives you about 3 hours for 256 gigs, which is probably honestly the mode I would film most in for a lot of things where it's like longer form, maybe it's documentary, or you're filming long form scenes, interviews, any kind of thing like that, where you're just going to be recording constantly. That's probably the mode I would use. And then this is where we start talking about overheating a little bit. If you back out here, you'll notice that 4K HQ mode is just like a toggle. You enable it and disable it. And it doesn't actually, let's do fine 23, and let's go down to IPB. So you'll notice that I switched to that 4K HQ mode, and the duration is the same as if you're not in HQ mode. So basically, I didn't realize this, but a lot of people have been talking about like the HQ mode and it overheating, and so you have to drop it down. And I assumed that HQ gave you bigger file sizes, but it doesn't. It just gives you better detailed for the file size, which I have to do some more testing. I just got this today, so I have to go through the footage and see how it actually compares the HQ versus the regular mode. But I was just surprised that like, okay, well, if I can just turn HQ mode on and enable it all the time and the file size is the same as if it were off, then wouldn't I always want it on? And then of course you would always want it on, except that causes the camera to overheat. And in fact, it did overheat on me. It was just sitting there. I wasn't even recording. The camera was just sitting. Oddly enough, this is a rental and like I literally can't turn it off. So like you can see the off switch, it does nothing. I think it's been used and abused already. So for some reason, I don't know, like the on switch, like to turn off the camera, I have to take the battery out, which is not a terrible thing. It's better than not being able to turn the camera on, but I can't turn it off. So the camera was just sitting there, and then I walked away for a couple minutes, came back, and it had overheated. And I will say that you can feel the camera, this camera, I could feel that it was warmer and it was actually heating up. So as far as, the overheating being a myth or it's a timer or it's lies or whatever, I'll just say that the camera felt warm, like uncomfortably warm, not scalding hot, not gonna burn your hand off, but it did feel warm as if the camera was working really, really hard. Now, I will say that's kind of odd considering it was just sitting there, and I do have overheat control on. You'll see in the menu here. This is with 1.1. Overheat control is on, and that's supposed to kind of keep it from overheating when it's just sitting there, but it still did. So, I had to switch, I had to go back into the system, turn off, go into the movie quality, turn off the HQ mode, and then you'll see, okay, now we're back to like regular 4K UHD, not HQ mode, but the time is still the same. So the file sizes aren't any bigger, at least from the estimate of how long you can record. And like I said, that's probably the setting I would use most often for long form, recording, documentary, interview type stuff where you're just rolling through tape and there's no sense in capturing it at like 8K raw. That's just insane for that type of stuff most of the time. So I'd probably do something like this if I was going to buy the R5. But as you can tell, maybe I'm already leaning into like, not quite there for video features. The other thing that's kind of goofy, and this will be hard to show, so I'll just have to talk about it. I'm very used to the GH5, okay? So I'll just say that up front. Also used to the Ursa Mini Pro. Both of those cameras have a double tap to zoom feature on the LCD screen. So when the LCD is open, you double tap and it'll punch in. It'll like 2 times magnify, and then you can change from there. You can zoom in even more if you need to on the GH5. Ursa Mini, you can't actually do that. It's just the 2x magnification. But the R5, I was expecting something similar, it also having a touchscreen. However, it doesn't work that way. Every time I've tried to like double tap and tap to zoom during kind of live recording to check focus, or even not while I'm recording, just in live view, just double tap to like punch in, doesn't do that. They still have the magnifying glass that Canon has had for like the longest time, where you click that button and that will zoom you in. However, you can't do that if you have some other features enabled. So this is where it gets really like in the weeds. And this of course is not anything anyone else would talk about, but it did strike me as being odd because I was trying to punch in to check my zoom, right? Let's see if it'll allow me to do it here. So you can't see it. I wish you could and it would display it, but it says the image cannot be magnified in the tracking autofocus mode. So if you turn autofocus off, then you can punch in and zoom in and punch back out. So hopefully you can see that it's doing that. You can see that I'm doing the live stream with the GH5, so you can punch in, zoom. But if you have the autofocus on, you can't do that. Now that would be fine, except in photo mode, it's even weirder, or in video mode, there's like in the menu, we can go here and we can go to, it's over on the autofocus page. So this is where you can change your autofocus method. You can detect people, do eye detection, which works really, really well. And we'll talk about that later because I do have some photo examples that we'll get to in a little bit. But on the, where is it? There's a focus assist, focus guide. Is that what it is? If this is on, it actually is kind of cool, and I can't show you, but it's this kind of cool system that maybe has been on other Canon mirrorless cameras. I just haven't used them, but it kind of racks these two little arrows together, and when they overlap, it shows you that it's in focus. But when that's on and you're in video mode, you can't punch to zoom with the magnifying glass. So you can't have both. You can't have this kind of helpful tool that shows you if your manual focus is good, and then to confirm, like being able to do the zoom thing. So it was a weird little quirk where like too many features were running simultaneously, and it locked me out of being able to kind of punch to zoom, which I was very irritated by initially, because I was like, why can't I do this? This should be a feature. I should be able to zoom in, and it just wasn't letting me do it with the settings I had. So one of them being autofocus, the other being this kind of focus guide thing. And I really wish they had the double tap. It feels very natural, rather than having to hunt for the magnify button, which seems like kind of unnecessary. Like it probably should just be something else at this point. But maybe there are people out there who like using the magnifying glass button, and they use it for some special thing that I'm not using it for. But for me, it's kind of like I would rather use the touchscreen to do that kind of stuff. In any case, let me check my notes here. They talked about the switching between video mode and photo mode, and that being kind of clunky with the mode button. It's not the toggle wheel that you're probably familiar with that's on most cameras, where it's just like, which mode do you want to be in, spin the wheel. This is more of like a digital display with this mode button, and you scroll, and then going between the photo modes and the video modes, you have to hit the info button, which is down here. So you're hitting up here to switch modes. There's nothing to twist or spin. You have to hit the mode button up here, then come down to info, hit that, and that's how you toggle between the modes, which just seems kind of odd and clunky to me. And then the other thing I'll talk about is that this being mirrorless, obviously, you have a mechanical shutter and you have an electronic shutter, but you don't have the whole mirror box assembly that you'd have with a DSLR. So you can do the electronic shutter and it can be silent, which is fantastic. However, oddly enough, on the R5, it's like electronic, totally silent, or mechanical with like a small sound. It's actually very quiet here. I can even get into, all right, so let's do this. Let's hit the mode button, then hit info, pop over here to photo mode, in which case, hey, it's showing you that. Well, wait a minute. Hey, look at all that. We've got all our settings. So I guess you have to be in the photo mode, and then you can see all your camera settings. And so if you're in video mode, that's how you get the clean feed. If you're in photo mode, you get the feed with the display. Look at that. Look at that. Figure something out on the fly. Anyway, that's awesome. That's good to know that you can do it. So you can see all the settings right there. In any case, we were talking about the sound of the shutter, which shutter mode right here. So electronic. If it's electronic, you don't hear it at all. It's totally silent. Nothing. And there's no noise, there's no haptic feedback, there's nothing. You're just mushing on this button, taking pictures, hopefully. It feels, I don't really like how this feels. It feels like you're taking pictures on like an iPhone or something, where it's just like there's no haptics there. There's nothing that's giving you any kind of sense that something's happening other than the screen flashes briefly. But it's just kind of, it is what it is, I suppose. If you go to mechanical, so there's an electronic first curtain, which is kind of in between. So you can hear that. And then we've also got mechanical, which is like that. So the odd thing is with electronic, there is no sound, and there's no option to turn sound on. And this is what I would kind of like. The electronic mode, you can shoot 20 frames per second photo, where mechanical, you're limited to 12 frames per second photo. I believe that's the numbers. So it's like you would want to, if you want to do those really, really fast bursts, like basically almost video speed, videos, cinematic videos, like 24 frames a second, you can shoot 20 frames a second, 45 megapixel raw photos in electronic mode, but there's nothing that tells you it's like taking a photo. So unlike the Sony cameras or the Panasonic cameras, I'm pretty sure most of them give you the option to make a sound even if you're in the electronic mode. So it's not like being electronic is completely silent. It can be if you want it that way, but you can also have it do like a little shutter noise to kind of give you that satisfaction of, yo, you took a picture, because it makes the noise. I haven't found a way to do that on the R5, and I don't know that there is one to be able to do electronic shutter but still make a satisfying noise for the times where you just want the feedback of, yeah, you took a photo. Because like in the electronic mode, there's nothing that signifies it. You know, like I'm holding it's in burst mode. So like other than that little flicker on the edge, you know, it's sort of, oh yeah, you're taking photos, but like it just, there's times where I would want it to feel more like I'm taking a photo, getting that nice sound or something. It doesn't have to be super loud. It doesn't have to be big and clunky, but just something that makes it sound nice. The only other option is to switch it into mechanical mode, and then you do get that sound, or the electronic first curtain, which I don't know if that mode has what the frames per second is for the electronic first curtain. But I know that you do take a hit if you go mechanical, in which case you're getting, you know, the sound, which is nice, but it's not as fast as the electronic. Just a little nitpick, a little gripe. But let's take a look at some photos now that we've talked about some of these kind of like initial discoveries of just using the camera that I haven't heard people talking about, just things that kind of stood out as being odd and weird to me. Let's talk about some photos, and you can take a look here. This is my son Anderson. We'll go back to the beginning because they're having some fun outside. So I was just taking some casual photos. These are just candids. There's nothing fancy or special about them, but they're just playing in the sandbox and having a good time. And I thought it would be a good time to test out the camera. So obviously got some sand on his face, pretty messy, but you can zoom in here, and obviously with 45 megapixels, you have tons of detail, tons of resolution to work with, which is just fantastic to see. It's beautiful Canon photos. I can't say it enough. This camera is a joy to shoot with in terms of photography, because this autofocus system, people applaud it, but I'll just continue to recommend the Canon autofocus and the eye tracking and the face detection is just incredible. I'm shooting all these at 2.8, so I'm as wide open as I can be with this 24-70 lens, and the images are just fantastic. These are just basically JPEGs with some light adjustments in Lightroom, but you can see like it just, the thing that about this autofocus, it just doesn't miss, which is, you're taking, if you want, up to 20 frames per second, 45 megapixels, raw if you want, and it just doesn't miss. What's cool is that all of these photos that I'm taking are just like on the fly. You know, it's my kids. They're running around. This is Clark, my other son. They're just running around. They're playing. They're having a good time. They're being silly, and I'm just taking photos. I don't even have to think about autofocus. It just gets it every single time, because it just works and tracks perfectly. So if I was shooting with an even better prime lens, maybe if I stop down a little bit, you know, just getting that beautiful razor sharp, super in focus, it's just incredible how well the autofocus works over and over and over again. And I'm not even trying. It really is point and shoot, which is like the bad name for like the cameras. Like, oh, it's like a point and shoot camera. But no, you can take this camera and you can literally point it and shoot it. And if there's a person there, it's going to get them in focus almost every single time. Like I went through lots of photos and they're all there. They nailed it all every single time. Now, I will say that using this camera, like the photos, editing them, they're a pain. So my Lightroom wasn't updated, so I couldn't even load in the raw stuff. So these are just JPEGs from camera with some mild adjustments in Lightroom. And even the JPEGs being 45 megapixels, they're just, it bogs my computer down. So that is one thing. Both on the video side, I've heard people, I haven't pulled in the video into Premiere, but I've heard people talking about the video as a pain to edit. And I can imagine, because I already can't preview it in Finder. But these photos, like you can even take, you know, selfie style, because it's got the flip screen. So here I am snapping a picture of myself, and it don't even have to think about autofocus. Don't even have to pick the pixel, pick the dot. It's just like gets it in focus every single time. And it's a joy to shoot with in that regard, just taking photos, because it's so easy. You can focus on all the other stuff of like where you want to be, what focal length you want. Like, oh, these were fun. So got to play in the water for a little bit. But you can just, there's so much you can do when the autofocus just works for you. And what's great is that seeing that also apply to video is even potentially even more magical, and why I really wish this camera were kind of better as a true hybrid, because the video features that are there are fantastic. The problem is just the camera just gets too hot and overheats. And I really think Canon should have done a better job at designing the R5 to not do that, because I don't think it would have been all that difficult. Maybe, I don't know. I can't say. I'm not a camera designer, manufacturer, but I really wish they had tried harder to make it not overheat, because the joy of shooting this camera photos and then being able to have those same principles apply to video and seeing it work in real time is just, it's incredible. And I'm not like nothing. I didn't have to pick an autofocus point, nothing. It just gets it every single time exactly where you would want. 45 megapixels. It's fantastic. 20 frames a second. Like it's magical. It's just gives you that Canon, I don't know. There's something about the way they design their cameras that it makes it fun and fast and easy to shoot. So the 5D Mark IV, for example, it's like, I would say that's probably, me at my fastest taking pictures, just because they just make it easy on the 5D Mark IV. And the R5 is the same way. It's even easier with the autofocus system, that especially if you're taking pictures of people. Now, I will say, if there's two people in the frame, you can see Clark is in the background here. The camera picked his face to focus on instead of Anderson, who's in the foreground. Now, granted, they both started way back by the slide there, and then Anderson ran forward, so it just picked Clark and stuck with him. So you can see, oh, he's in focus the whole way, and it just picked his eye way there in the background. But it got a face. It might not have been the one you wanted, but it did get a face. But I'll just say that, like, yeah, shooting with this camera, just, it feels so good for photos. And the really disappointing thing is that it doesn't feel that good. Well, it does feel that good for video until it overheats. And like I said, I just had it sitting there. And of course you want the HQ mode. Of course you want to be able to shoot 4K 120, which I did shoot some clips of them, playing with the hose there and the sprinkler. 4K 120, which I'm sure I'll do and talk about in one of these streams here some night once I get it all loaded in. But like I said, the files are kind of a pain to work with. The photos are just massive. Couldn't edit the raw ones because my Lightroom's not up to date. The JPEGs still slowed my machine down to like a screeching halt. I had 800 photos just because the burst mode is so incredibly fast, and like no one needs, well, not no one, you probably don't need 20, photos per second. That's pretty insane. So I would probably turn that burst mode down, but I was just playing around, putting the camera, kind of pushing it to its limit, seeing how often it would keep stuff in focus, and pretty much every time, like it never fails. So you have this just like amazing power on the photo side, as well as this amazing power on the video side. And I've said this before, is like, on paper, the R5 was like the camera I was going to get. And I said, don't get your expectations too high, like don't get your hopes up, because there's probably something, it's going to be a crop mode, or it's going to be something. And then of course it's this whole overheating issue, which I'll say again, the camera did feel warm and just sitting there. So there is some kind of thermal issue going on with this camera in the video mode. And I really wish they had just figured that out and done a better job, because it really would be, aside from a couple of the weird oddities with the menus and, certain functions working here or there, it would have been basically perfect for people who love photography, people who love video, people who love doing both. I mean, it's an incredible camera, and the autofocus, the stabilization. I will say, I'll show you here real quick, the stabilization. So this is something else I haven't heard anyone really talk about all that much, but if I go here and I can show you it's not, and of course it's not on my screen here, so I have to like look at this one. So that's weird okay, so in video mode, so if we switch back here, hit the info button. So for video, I have it on my screen here as well as here, but I don't have the display. If I go to photo mode, I get the display info, but I don't have any signal here on the back here. So that's really kind of annoying. Anyway, maybe we can go to that setting here in the menu and see if that's a HDMI setting. Where is it? HDMI? No, it's, where's it at? You gotta always dig through this stuff, figure out where it's at. I don't know if I'll find it off the, yeah, because it's different for the photo mode versus video mode. In any case, what I was going to show you was that, again, we got to switch between the modes. So if we're in video mode, and you can't see this, it is actually really helpful. On the screen when you're in video mode, there is a red dot for recording. So hopefully you can see that. Looks like the camera's recording all the time. It's not. It's a button that you can hit to start recording, which is very helpful. You know, not having it on the GH5 and then seeing it on the R5, I'm like, oh yeah, that is nice, because the Ursa Mini does that as well. It just has a button on the screen that you can hit to record. It's in a slightly better spot. I don't really like the way the R5 does this because it just looks like it's recording. But no, if you tap that, it'll start recording, and then it'll say it's recording up in the top, and then it has a stop button here. Just an odd little quirk that I can't show you on this screen because we're in video mode. But I wanted to show you, which maybe is better to do it in photo mode so you can see. But then I can't see. That's the problem. All right, I'll try and do this. In the quick menu, there is, where's the stabilization? If it's not here, I'm going to be upset because it's there in the video mode. Oh, of course, of course. So I'm trying to show you this display, but I'll have to do it in the video mode. This is the quirks of this camera. It's just like there's a few things that could have been a little bit more optimized. Anyway, trust me, I'm on the quick menu, and you should hopefully be able to see this. Maybe if I go wider, you can truly see it. So right now the digital stabilization is off because we were, again, before trying to show that 8K RAW mode. So if I turn stabilization on, you'll see that punch in. Hopefully you saw that, right? So that's regular. This is stabilization. It's going to crop the sensor a little bit to give you that extra wiggle room to stabilize the sensor. Okay, that makes sense. But there's also an enhanced stabilization. So here's no stabilization, that's stabilization, and then here's enhanced. It's significant. So it's nice that there are levels that you would want, but each one comes with a crop that is more and more severe, which the enhanced one is probably a little bit too much for my taste. I'd have to test it out to really know how smooth it is to see if it's worth it. But in general, I'd just probably use the regular stabilization and save the enhanced for only those times where I actually need it because you're cropping in so much. In any case, that's kind of the first, I think that's all my notes. Yeah, it's the silence of the electronic shutter was just something I wish I could turn a sound on. That's me being kind of nitpicky. It's something you can do on many other cameras, so I'm not sure why it's not here. And then really just hitting home the point, it feels so nice to finally have a camera that is that like point and shoot, but proper full frame professional camera that can shoot really fast, totally silent if you want, have all these great features built right in terms of the face tracking, eye tracking, all that stuff. It works fantastic. You can point it, you can shoot it, and it works great. And you would want that same functionality on the video side. And it's there, but you have to go down to that kind of 4K 30 mode. You can't do 4K 60, you can't do 4K 120, you can't do 8K RAW, you can't do any of the high-end modes without it overheating. And it's just that thing of how much better this camera could have been if they just spent a little bit more time making sure that those features were just as solid as they are on the photography side. Because the photography side, taking pictures with this camera, it's phenomenal. It's perfect, flawless. Video, it could have been there. They could have had it. And for whatever reason, they just decided not to. Which is really, really unfortunate. Let's pop over to the chat here. What's going on, everybody? Yes, this is live. That was a long talk. I didn't want to interrupt, though, too much. But what are you currently shooting this video with? Nabin, this is the GH5. Hopefully you saw that, as I kind of showed with the live view. You have to enable it for the double tap. Is the power toggle still broken? Yeah, on my camera, And again, I think it's just the rental. Someone left a comment saying that like some other person who rented it probably like tore the camera apart to like test overheating or something, and then maybe broke the switch. Like that's possible. That's a good theory, I suppose. But yeah, like literally the camera's in the off position right now, and this switch does nothing on my camera. Like I can't turn it off. I have to take the battery out to power it down, which is odd. Not what I expected when I got it. A hands-on review of the R5. Wow. Yes. I've talked about the R5 plenty. I figured it was time I actually put my hands on it and played around with it for a little bit. If your Mac has a T2 coprocessor, it will probably edit R5 H265, 422 great. Try FCP or DaVinci if Premiere doesn't, but old Macs, no joy. Yeah, that's the problem. Like new stuff comes out and it's not optimized for, you know, it's a shame that if you buy a new camera, you have to then go buy, you know, the newest, latest and greatest computer to then just be able to, you know, edit that footage. And then you buy that maxed out computer and then you upgrade your camera a couple years later and then you feel like it's the same thing over and over again. What I really appreciate about Ursa Mini footage, whether it's ProRes or Blackmagic RAW, both of them edit great. The GH5, I've never had problems aside from the 10-bit all-I type stuff. Like that does bog my computer down, even if it is H264. Usually not using H265 all that often because we all know it's such a pain. But, you know, the 10-bit stuff on the GH5, just it struggles a little bit. I've always had a hard time editing footage from my Phantom 4 Pro. That drone, the video files are also a pain to edit. So I like when there's just cameras that spit out files that are really nice and easy to edit. And I hear the A7S III, the files are flawless. The R5, I haven't actually tested it myself, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but I've just seen that like in Finder, there's no preview, and that's never a good sign. If you can't preview it in Finder with just good old QuickTime, you're probably in for a mess. You do know that you can shoot unlimited 4K HQ in crop mode. Yeah, but I don't want to buy a full frame camera and then put it in crop mode. Like then I might as well just stick with the GH5 and have a speed booster. You know, like that's one of the main things I would criticize the S1H for, or you know, any of the Panasonic cameras. We'll see about the S5 tomorrow. Is the Lumix live stream tomorrow morning for the S5. If you're gonna do, you know, a full frame camera and then 4K 60 or 4K 120 and then you got to be in crop mode, it's like, no, I don't want to have a full frame camera and have to film in crop mode to get what I want. Yes, it's Super 35. Yes, it's a cinema standard. Yeah, like I get it. You know, like that's the Ursa Mini Pro. It's Super 35. It's basically APS-C, you know, more or less. But if you're buying the full frame camera, it's because you want it to be the full frame camera. This was my criticism of the 5D Mark IV way back when. It's like, oh, it's got video and it's got 4K, but it's super cropped. And you're like, oh, this defeats the point and the purpose of having these features on this camera. And so like, it's just, I don't personally, while you can get around it, I don't like having to do the workarounds. I mean, I didn't really even talk about it very much, but like on the video side, having the 30-minute time limit or the overheating and having all these limitations and these workarounds and, oh, well, you got to turn it off in between every clip so it can like cool down. It's just like all those little issues add up over time to make it just not fun to shoot with. And it's like, oh, I got to switch it into crop mode so it doesn't overheat. Oh, I've got to do this so it doesn't do that. Oh, I've got to hit record again because the clip ended. It's like, just make it smooth and intuitive and easy so I don't have to have all the stuff in the back of my brain of like, well, do this, if this, but then if that's, then that. It's too much, and it should be easy and smooth and seamless, because like it is that way for photography, and that's why people love this camera for taking photos, and I do as well. Like, yeah, the photos are great. I want that same fluidity for video as well. Let's see. I've just ordered the Metabones EF to RF speed booster, which basically gives me no crop and another focal length otherwise. So is that basically for medium format on the on RF? Is that what the Metabone speed booster does? I'm not aware of the full frame speed boosters. Let's see, not forgetting you can record unlimited 4K with the Atomos. Again, I don't want to have to put an external screen on. I just want it to work like there is no overheating in the photo mode, right? You can take aside from like your buffer, which is like a very clear defined thing of like, yep, this is your buffer, it is full. The overheating is like, well, you got to do all these workarounds, and if you use an external recorder, and then you got to turn this feature off and flip your screen, turn your screen off, so because that causes it to overheat too. Like, that's the thing, this camera warms itself up just sitting there doing nothing, and that's why it's a problem. It's not like you're recording and you're only causing it to get hot during record times. It's no, the camera's just sitting there not doing anything, it's just on and it's still warming up. That to me seems like a defect. That to me seems like a problem you would want to address. If you work at Canon, you'd say, hey, we shouldn't have our camera overheat when it's just sitting there doing nothing. Like, that to me is unacceptable, regardless of how many workarounds you have. Yeah, if you have an Anibos and you want to have an external monitor all the time, external recorder, fine. But like, that's not a good excuse for why the camera is the way it is. It's like, no, they should have just made the camera better. And I think once they update the firmware with lower bit rates, it will further reduce or even eliminate the new Canon cripple clock. We'll see. Canon is a joke. A7S3 is king. Yeah, A7S3 is next on my list of things to test once it's available. If no overheating issue, it may double the current asking price. That's true, but like, it has their MSRP. It should retail for its set price. Now, I will say that the R5, if you try and buy it, because right now you can't on Amazon or B&H or Adorama or anywhere, you can't find it new. So the people who are selling it on eBay and Craigslist and elsewhere, it is marked up at least $1,000, maybe even more now, because they're just hard to get. And if you're a photographer who wants all the amazing features of the R5, well, maybe you'd be willing to pay more. But if anything, I would pay less for the camera in the state it's in, just because for me personally, I love the photo side of things. Works great. It's fantastic. No complaints. Video side of things, really, really irritating and frustrating, having to not only be dealing with it overheating during the shoot, but then after the fact, having the struggle with the files, and they're just like kind of clunky and they're not easy to edit. And now you got to upgrade your computer and you got to have the right graphics card, and you can't use Premiere, you have to use Resolver, you have to use Final Cut. It's like, why can't it like just make it? I get that if 8K RAW is the crazy, extreme case where that one's tough to edit, but like just basic, 4K 60 or 4K 30, like that shouldn't be, this extreme taxing thing on, modern hardware. It just shouldn't be. We've had 4K and all this stuff for a long time. And by the point it's in the computer, sensor size, all that other stuff about the camera doesn't matter anymore. You just have a 4K file. So if I could play a 4K file from the GH4, 6 years ago, granted, you have some bitrate stuff and like things do get better, but so do computers, and my computer is newer now than it was back then. So it should be more like, butter and buttery smooth, not sitting there waiting to preview a video clip and waiting for your machine to catch up. That's only a couple years old. Like, it should be more standardized than that, especially when you can edit Ursa Mini Blackmagic RAW footage, no problem. Like, and that's RAW. So if that can be as optimized as it is, I don't think there's any excuse for anything else. Max knows that IPB is far easier to play back than All-I. I would probably shoot IPB anyway. All-I, for a lot of the stuff that I shoot that is more long form, it just eats up so much more of the card space, where you're taking your record time down by a third, and then you're filling up your hard drives 3 times as fast. So even on the GH5, I usually don't do the All-I all that often. It's just for those certain situations where you want the shot to be, the best version of itself that you can get for that one little, 10-second clip or 1-minute clip. But if you're doing, 30-minute or 60-minute interview or any kind of long form sequence, it's just, to me, it doesn't make sense, because no viewer ever knows or cares. It's just, maybe in the back of your mind, that it's like, oh, it's better, it's superior because it's the better codec, but the time that it takes to edit and then the actual meaningful difference at the end result is pretty insignificant in a lot of cases. More for like I don't want to say the lower end, but like just the stuff that's more just like digital in nature, like the stuff that goes on YouTube, the stuff that's just on the web that's going to be compressed anyway, that you're probably, someone watching it isn't even going to watch it in 4K. Like, of course, you'll export it that way, right, for the highest quality, but then someone's going to watch it on their phone. They're going to be half paying attention, like that kind of stuff where it's like, okay, why am I taking on this huge cost and burden of like filling my hard drives and then pulling my hair out, trying to edit this footage that's hard to work with just for the sake of like the end person not even knowing the difference, which is why I talk a lot about on the GH5. I have Vlog L. I can shoot 10-bit. I can do Vlog, but oftentimes I shoot Cinelec V and I just do 8-bit mode because oftentimes that's good enough for a lot of situations. But it just definitely depends on the project. A few more dollars and buy a red Komodo. Yeah, but then a red Komodo, you miss out on all the photography benefits, and that's also kind of in beta. You really can't get it right now. It's not going to take photos as well as the R5, and I assume the autofocus isn't going to be nearly as good. So they're just very different cameras for different types of people. And yeah, if you're a cinema shooter, get a Komodo if you want. Get a pocket cinema camera, 6K, or get an Ursa Mini, or get a FX9. Like there's so many cameras out there. Get a Z-Cam, whether you get the F6 or the S6, like there's Kinefinity, there's so many cinema cameras out there. It's actually there's probably more cinema cameras at this point than there are like proper hybrids. I mean, you think like the A7S III that's coming, you've got the S1H, the S1, maybe the S5, the R5, the R6, GH5, GH5S if you count those, the A7S II, and some of the, but it's just a handful. I feel like I know people like Fuji and the X-T4, Nikon. Nikon has its fans with the Z5 and the Z6, but just it seems like there's a lot and just an abundance of cinema cameras, and like the hybrids are all like they all should kind of be better at this point, and which is why I think the A7S III looks so promising, and the R5 looked even more promising. 45 megapixel stills is like incredible compared to the A7S III, which only gives you 12. But I'm far more attracted to the A7S III than the R5 at this point, just because like it balances it better. I think like I would probably take the 12 megapixels and the better video features than, hey, it's a great photo camera, but you have all these video limitations. Like that's just so annoying. Let's see. You sound real new school. The Phenomenal Life. Real new school. I don't know what that means. I've been shooting video. The first camera, I've talked about this before, the first camera I ever shot with was the XL1. After that, it was the DVX100. So like I do come from like digital new school, but I've had like the 5D Mark II when that first came out. Like I talked about it, the GH1. It's not like I just picked up a camera yesterday. So I don't know what that means, if that's supposed to be like a criticism or something. I just can only speak from like how I currently shoot. Maybe that's what that means. Like a lot of the stuff I produce, I don't know. It's just, I look at all the stuff we came from, back in the day, the HVX 200, it was like P2 cards, and with Final Cut 7, you had to log and transfer a lot of stuff. There was a time where, even with the 5D Mark II, you had to convert all that to ProRes because you couldn't edit H.264 all that well in Final Cut 7 back in the day. So there's like all these like strings from like, and the things that were crippling and like hamstring in the past now have gotten so much better. It's like I don't want to take a step backwards. So yeah, I want to shoot on SD cards. Yeah, I want files just to drag a file from an SD card to a hard drive and it just plays. Like that's what I don't want to have to log and transfer. I don't want to have custom media. I want to be able to like have a camera that's not this giant bulky behemoth on my shoulder. I want it to be handheld and lightweight and have stabilization. And yeah, I like the autofocus too. Like these are all things that make the job easier and better and less limiting and less workarounds, so you can move faster than you could in the past when everything was a restriction. Everything was a Okay, yeah, but it's not real 1080. It's this goofy stretched format, and you got to make your pixels. They're not square pixels, they're stretched pixels. Like all this stupid stuff. Oh, interlace, you got to change the fields, and oh, your pull down. And it's just a nightmare having to deal with all the technical nonsense that's like all the proprietary formats and all the artificial limitations that are put in place. It's like, no, make it simple and easy so you can make a video in a day or in a week. Like it shouldn't have to be, not every video should be this like month-long endeavor to, transfer and do all this, nonsense just to handle the files. Like that's annoying. Photography like knows that, right? It used to be film, and then the moment it went to digital, and then that finally got better, it was like, oh, I can shoot a wedding and show in post photos basically like the next day or like day of in certain situations where, there's some wedding photographers who take photos and they like, you have printouts just like on the fly right there at the wedding so that, guests can have them and stuff. So like that's a huge benefit, and just the ability to do it if you want to, not that you have to, but the speed of it, like no more artificial barriers or artificial timers. And so that's why, the cripple clock in the R5, the overheating timer, feels like that kind of, why am I dealing with these strings being attached to everything? Like I just want it to work and not have to worry and think about it. I just think the crop mode, let's see. Richard Deloitte says, I just think the crop mode is a good workaround, whilst Canon hopefully lessen the cripple hammer. I don't know. I've got the new firmware, and I have to do more testing on the video side. I have some stuff lined up, so I'll do some proper video shoot type stuff and see how it actually performs and go through the editing process and actually do all the work, which is, why I rented this camera. It wasn't just for this, as to do some projects with it. So I'll go through that process and have more thoughts there, probably how significant the impact is. But I'll tell you, like when you can't use HQ mode, that just doesn't feel good. It's like, oh, do you want HQ mode? Yeah, okay, well, you can only have it for 30 minutes. And you're like, what? Now I have to go to like the less than HQ mode just because you got too hot. And oh, by the way, I wasn't even doing anything. The camera was just sitting there. I wasn't even filming. It just got too hot on its own. Maybe Sony begged Canon to cripple the R5 so the A7S III sell well. Yeah, I think the A7S III was going to sell really well. Working with Canon and video is a pain. I could never get over it with the R, although plenty of YouTube shills told me otherwise. Yeah, Canon in general, I feel like just, even on their cinema cameras, I don't know what they are now because I've just stayed away from them, but the initial like C300, C500, I don't know if they still do this, but the MXF files, like Canon's files and their formats and their organization of their files is so irritating to me compared to Blackmagic, where you just like put the card in and hey, here's your clips, and they're all .mov and you can just drag and drop, and there's no audio files separate or nothing. It's just, it is the file. The file is the file. And having dealt with some of that MXF stuff from the early cinema EOS cameras, I was just like, no, this is dumb. Like, no, I don't want to have to deal with this. So it's not even just on the hybrids. I don't know what it is now, if they've changed, if they're better, if they're just like .movs or whatever the file format is. But I do know that just Canon historically for me has always been the dream is there. Like you can see like, oh, autofocus. Oh, look at these features. Oh, look at this color science. Oh, look at the, this is high frame rate. And oh, they finally did it. And oh, it's beautiful and full frame. Oh, and then you actually get to using it and get through the process and you're like, oh, this is dumb. Like this is slow. And like, what are the benefits I'm getting? Oh, that like I can use the features sometimes, but now, with like the R5, it overheats. So you don't even get the feature all the time that you want it. It's like, it's just too much to have to deal with. So that's why I'm like, it's so close, but yet so far away. It's like they were this close to hitting that perfect sweet spot, and they've just missed it by a mile. I think I'll wait for the second batch. Yeah, we'll see. Photo side of things is academic. Any camera is good to grade at photography. Video has always lagged far behind for all brands. Yeah, guy with the camera. I will say that, and I haven't shot with the Sony cameras, the recent ones. So I can't speak to like the latest in the autofocus stuff. That's why I'm hoping to get my hands on the A7S III at some point to test the autofocus. But just like having a camera that does the face detection, eye detection, and not having to think about focus and just being able to shoot is such a joy compared to like on the 5D Mark IV, where you have to kind of pick your focus spot and like line it up, and hopefully if you have, tracking on, it doesn't work all the time, and there's just some limitations there. Same thing with the GH5 or the S1H, where like, yeah, the autofocus works and it can take pictures and they'll be sharp and they'll be in focus, but it just is slow. It slows you down ever so slightly to where you can't just point and shoot. And then having shot with the R5 for the first time, feeling like that sensation of just pointing and shooting the camera and not worrying about that, like, oh, did I pick the right autofocus point? Oh, is it going to get it this time? Are my autofocus settings tweaked to the perfect settings? It just worked. And that alone I get for photographers. Yeah, it's phenomenal. And you can see it working in video mode too. And you're like, yes, I want this. Like, and it works even in 4K 120. So I was shooting the high frame rate stuff and the autofocus was still working, still tracking, doing all the amazing stuff, like full frame. Like, yeah, that's what I want. What just happened? That was really weird. I have no idea why that happened. Oh, probably something. I have my, hopefully you can still hear me. Hopefully it's still in sync. I have my GH5 paired to my mobile app, so I can actually do focus on myself, because I can't quite reach. It's a little bit far away. So I have the Lumix app paired, but it probably just like timed out or something. I don't know. That makes me very nervous. Hopefully it's still working. Please let me know. I just saw a black screen. That's like the worst thing on a live stream. You definitely don't want that. Hopefully it's still working. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to run through these. Dude, I completely agree. Whoever's making these decisions, Canon, to avoid cannibalizing their cinema line is just encouraging a further exodus to Sony and the A7S III. Yeah, I agree with that. Oh my. Well, hopefully you can still hear me. I think you can. Oh, it's back again. That's really weird. I don't know what's going on. On the photography side of things, one of the best cameras I've ever used. Yep, Manny. Whoa, YouTube. Celeb in the house. Have you tried the Adobe Camera Raw? No, I have not. I enjoy using the R5 for personal stuff, but the S1H still comes out when it's mission critical. Wish the S1H had autofocus. The R5 or the R5 had a fan, and that's the thing. It's like the S1H and the Lumix cameras are so close, and they have, like, I'll say Panasonic and the Lumix cameras have the best additional features in terms of just making your life easier. There's a few things I didn't talk about with the R5, and I don't know that I can pull them from memory right now, but it's just like using the camera and you're like, oh, I wish I could do this real quick. Oh, one of them, for example, like the menu button being on the left side of the camera. I think a few people have talked about this, but like on my GH5, I can do everything right here. With one hand. I don't have to go over here at all. The menu, like layout stuff, just feels snappier on the GH5 in terms of like being able to reach stuff with your hands quicker. Shutter angle, something I've talked about a lot. Having shutter angle as an option is fantastic compared to on the R5, where it's like, oh, I'm going into 4K 120, and then it defaults to 1/120. It's like, no, I want to go 1/300 probably. I actually just want it to be 180-degree shutter. That way it just does all the math and work for me. So I'm not having to play with shutter speed and make it match my frame rate and all that stuff. So like that kind of stuff. There's something else that I really liked on the S1H. Maybe it was the electronic shutter, just being able to set like a noise for it, making a sound, even though you might want it to be silent sometimes, but sometimes you want that feedback. I really like that. So if anything else comes to mind, I'll say it. But like the Lumix stuff, the Lumix cameras and the Sony cameras to some extent, but I'd definitely say the Lumix ones for sure. Aside from autofocus, they have everything I could ever want, and aside from a few things like tweaking the menus, which I think they need to do, and breaking some of the codec stuff apart. But yeah, the R5 would be fantastic too if it had a fan, if it stayed cool. Like I've said it a million times, I'll say it again. The R5 on paper looked like the perfect camera, and they're so close. They could have had it, and they just decided to just blow it all away, I guess, and let Sony eat their lunch. I don't know who made the decision to allow not only that it overheats, because I think we'd accept that in like 8K RAW. Okay, it's just too much for the camera to handle or whatever. Or 4K 120, it's limited, fine. The camera just sits there and gets too hot. That's what's the most irritating. It just sits there. You're not even recording. It just is sitting there and it's getting too hot. That is just beyond me of like why anyone would think that that is acceptable in a $4,000 camera. And I know people will say, oh, it's got it's a 45 megapixel sensor and it's amazing photography. And yes, I agree with all of that. But the camera is sitting there and cooking itself to the point where I can't use some of the features that I would rely on. If you're on a shoot and you're using the camera and you're just filming 4K 30 and you're not doing HQ mode, you're just doing your normal business and it's getting too hot, and then you go to switch to 4K 120 and you just can't because you've been shooting in the regular mode, but it just got too hot just doing its normal thing. So you got to play this timer game of like, how long can I have it on? How long can I have it off? Oh, I can't do that right now. It's so much mental gymnastics to have to worry about a camera that's this finicky and this particular and not all that predictable. I know it's a little bit better with the new firmware, but like the camera felt hot. So I believe that it's getting warm, and I'm sure it's not good for a sensor to be that warm. So I don't think it's fake. I just think they should have done a much better job protecting their brand and their flagship camera from such debilitating restrictions. Let's see. Manny about 6 hours away. Started a workshop. Ranger East Coast, Manny. By the way, love your reviews and top straight info. Interesting to see. Will be interesting to see how consumer split is Canon joining mirrorless late and second generation of 4K video not being up to Sony. P2 4GB card. Yep, Phenomenal Life. Yeah, that's what a P2 4GB. I still have them somewhere. I could dig them up. P2 cards. I think those 4GB cards were like $800 each. $800 for like 4 gigabytes. Isn't that insane? Red Komodo seems lovely, but for the same price can get 3 Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, an ATEM Mini Pro, accessories, but I love the Stormtrooper Komodo body. Yeah, the Komodo looks cool, but I think if that's the style, like I think the Komodo, it does 4K 40 frames a second? You can technically do, 6K 40 frames a second. And you can do 6K 60 frames a second on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera for 6K. And that's like $2,000. Now, granted, it's not a red, so if you want a red or whatever that's meaningful to you, then for sure get a Komodo. But it's not like it's this mythical special camera that says these amazing things that no one else does. It's like it's the first time that Red has made a camera that cheap, so that's new. But there's plenty of other cinema cameras out there as well. So for anyone who's like looking to save money, if that's your main priority, there's a lot of other options that you could explore, and you wouldn't have to go for the Komodo route. Because even then, $6,000, that's for the base body. You're gonna have to get all the accessories. You're gonna have to get all the media to accommodate. And if you want to be in the Red ecosystem, for sure. But you could buy used Red cameras. You could buy from different brands. There's a lot of options out there. Let's see, and talk for days about this stuff. Did I say like apologies for that not doing streams last week? Hopefully I did a YouTube kind of post just saying I set up. Last week I was on like a family vacation up north in northern Arizona. I did a anamorphic vlog about it. Sort of. It was more of an anamorphic vlog about anamorphic vlogging, but up north at a cabin in the woods, and of course the internet is just terrible. Not nearly enough to stream. I brought some stuff, not this whole setup, that'd be insane, but I brought some stuff so I could stream because I planned on doing it, but the internet wasn't up to speed. So I took kind of a week off, and then yesterday I didn't do a stream because I went and saw Tenet, which we could talk about if you want. But I'm kind of back. I was off for a week, and I love talking about this stuff. It's fun. I enjoy it. I think I've said this before too, but it's like, it's nice when you enjoy your work and what you do, because then it's not really work so much. And I know that's a very cliche thing to say, but it's true. If you're passionate about something, it makes doing it and learning about it all that much easier. Sony XAV-CS IHS seems like an IQ test. If people make videos about what you're naming means you're doing something wrong. Yeah, the codecs and the formats, everything is just, it's so irritating. I've said this about camera names and just keeping track of, is it the G9 or the G85 or what is a GH5 or a GH5S? Like, how are regular people supposed to know what these things are and make meaningful decisions about them? How do I know if I want a G100 or a G9? Like, which one sounds better? Well, a G100, probably. No, you don't want that one. You want the G9. Well, how would you know that? Like, how would any regular person know? And the answer is they don't. And even like the R5 or the R6. Doesn't R6 sound like the better one? But why is the R6 cheaper? It's only in goofy camera land that we know that, like, oh, the R5 is the better one and the R6 is the little brother one. Why? How would any regular person know that? How is anyone supposed to know the difference between like an A7R4 or like an A9 II? Like, it doesn't mean anything. And then, yeah, the codecs are even more ridiculous beyond that. So it was H.264, which everyone got used to, H.264, 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 and then H.265. Okay, H.265, that's a new one. But then it turned to HEVC, like that somehow was meaningful, which is like high efficiency video codec, I think is what it stands for. But it didn't seem all that efficient because editing it is a pain. So what happened to H.265? Like, it's the same, I assume, but it's probably different. Like, and there's so much, I'm sure there's technical nuance of like why these things are the way they are, but it's definitely made by people who aren't expecting to be communicating with regular human beings about like why would I care? Why? Just make it simple, make it easy, make it intuitive. NVIDIA RTX 3000, are you kidding me? You're back and forth. We hear you when you go invisible. That's good. When I go invisible, you can still hear me. I have the Canon EOS R, and the AF works great with photography and videography. I switched last year from the Sony A7R3. You already heard of the Canon C70. Yes, I have heard of the Canon C70. I'm, again, what is it? Kind of lowering my expectations for what these things can be after seeing the R5 and how amazing that should have been, and it's not. But the C70, smaller sensor, so Super 35, which is fine, but I think if you're in that, like for me, the reason I want a proper hybrid is like for full frame photography and for the video features when I need them in that form factor. Having a C70 that smaller sensor and has built-in NDs, but it costs more. You're like, why couldn't they just make the R5 that? Why does it have to be the smaller sensor? Why does it have to be this separate thing that they're similar? And this seems to be what Canon does time and time and time again. They make something that people really like and they say, okay, yeah, we like that. Now just give us that. But like, for example, 5D Mark IV, okay? Yeah, let's give us that, the 5D Mark IV, but no crop, 4K, and make it mirrorless and like give some extra frame rates and stuff. And they're like, okay, great, we've got the R5, it's coming, it's got 8K RAW, it's got 4K 120, all this stuff. And then it comes out and it's like, yeah, but it's got like all this overheating stuff. And you're like, but wait, the 5D didn't overheat, it didn't do any of that. Like, what happened? Like, why'd you mess it up again? And they're like, okay, great, you don't want it to overheat? Now we have the C70. And the C70 is really what you want because it's not going to overheat. It's got a fan in there. And you're like, okay, great. All right, that's the one, the C70. And they're like, but it's a Super 35 sensor. And you're like, wait, what? I want the full frame from the R5. Like, that's the one that I liked. And the only thing I hated about it was the overheating. I liked everything else. Why are you making it the smaller sensor? Oh, well, that's like the cinema standard. It's like, yeah, but I want the photography standard of full frame. Like, stop pulling this funny business. And they'll say, oh, but it has built-in NDs. And you go, okay, well, all right, maybe I'll deal with it. So it's like the same price because it's like, smaller sensor, but more cinema focused. No, it's going to be more. And you're like, oh, well, get out of here. Like, if Sony can do it in the A7S III, they can do what they're doing. Panasonic with their, Lumix, should be able to do similar things. Canon should be able to do similar things. And at that point, you should be really arguing about like the lenses, you know, or maybe if you want to nitpick the color science or for like the built-in kind of picture profiles, or maybe some of them, you know, the Lumix cameras do anamorphic. Oh, but technically the Sony ones are a little bit better at autofocus, but like Lumix has finally caught up too, right? They should all be relatively equal, and we could actually have arguments about things that are meaningful differentiators. Oh, you want to shoot anamorphic? Okay, well then go for the Lumix. Oh, you want really good low light? Okay, go for the A7S. Like that sort of stuff makes sense. In these situations where Panasonic basically has broken autofocus at this point. Again, we'll see if the S5 is any different. I kind of doubt it because it's using the same tech they've been using forever, but we'll see. That live stream is tomorrow morning. Panasonic, the autofocus is basically trash compared to Canon and Sony. And this is something I've said many times before, and I even wanted to check, like on the GH5. Like they've done some firmware updates, and I realized I wasn't on the latest firmware that supposedly had more autofocus optimizations for the GH5, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just give them benefit of the doubt, one last shot. Let me try autofocus on the GH5. Did some tests, and it's absolute trash. Like it's either too slow, and like you'll hold something up, right, and like it won't react. So it's either too slow, or someone will just be sitting there and it's constantly doing the hunting, you know, and you see the background shifting and pulsing, going crazy because it's constantly hunting for that autofocus. It's like, oh, what's in focus? What's in focus? What's in focus? What's in focus? And it's like, this thing I'm holding up to you is in focus. Make that in focus. And it doesn't do it. So like, gave them the benefit of the doubt, tried it again, updated the new firmware, still unusable. So Panasonic has the terrible autofocus. So it's like, and it's been micro four thirds for so long, that was just a deal breaker right there for a lot of people. Now they have the S line, you know, Lumix S1, S1H, etc., full frame. So, okay, now we're all full frame. We're all competing at the same level. We got full frame from Canon, full frame from Nikon, full frame from Sony, full frame from Lumix. Autofocus, really bad for Lumix. If they fix that, they'll be fine. And then Canon is like, no, we got autofocus. It's great. We got IBIS. It's great. It's fantastic. We've got all the features you would want. 4K 120, full frame, no crop, all this amazing stuff. It's got log built right in. You don't have to pay to upgrade for that. It's coming with, you know, C-Log 3, and they're going to add a raw light, and they're going to do all this great stuff. And you're like, great, but the camera still overheats. So like, just as equally as Panasonic is a no-go for some people because the autofocus is terrible, Canon is kind of a no-go for some people too because like there's the overheating. And so what are you left with? Sony? Well, we'll see with the A7S III once I like test it out. All signs point to it being basically the perfect camera aside from, you know, not taking high resolution photos, but for some people it's not as important. You got Nikon, Fuji, like, okay, they're putting out cameras, but nothing that's, you know, all that inspiring for me personally. It's like, you really want Panasonic fix the autofocus, Canon fix the overheating thing, and then we'll have a conversation about who has the better lenses or who does things slightly better. Oh, Panasonic has shutter angle, so I'll go with them. Like little nitpick stuff, not deal breaker, just camera doesn't work at all for what you need it to do. That's where I want to be. That's the future I see, where we can have more balanced, reasonable conversations about these things, not the garbage we're dealing with now. All right, let's see. All those video features and tools are what makes Panasonic stand out from the rest, despite no functioning autofocus. Yeah, just fix the autofocus, Panasonic. Version 1.1 firmware has economy mode that doesn't cook. It line skips when not recording. Switch to HQ when you hit record. So, random geocacher, I have that overheat protection on, and I thought that's how it was supposed to work because I watched some of the stuff that No Life had put out about, you know, oh, you have to record and then it'll switch to HQ mode. On my camera, it was just sitting there in standby mode with overheat protection on, and it's still overheated. So I don't know that that's perfect. You know, and it was in HQ mode, so I'm in 4K HQ, not recording, overheat protection on, and you know what? Let me just. I think this will look nicer. I'm just gonna put the R5 up here because we don't need to look at the Atomos anymore. Although you all can't really see it because you're looking at the chat, but I'll take this down. Have I talked about this tripod before? This is why I love this tripod. The plate just is a twisty screw, just like that. So the plate, there's no, it's granted it's a photography tripod, but I also like that. I like the telescoping function of just being able to raise it up and down without like a proper video tripod, fluid head, and you have to break all 3 legs, set it level every single time just to move it up an inch is the dumbest thing. Like if just shoot with a photography tripod, because oftentimes I'm not even moving the moving the head all that much, like for like a pan or a tilt or something. Like I don't do those moves all that often. I think they look kind of not all that great. They look kind of just cheap because they're like, I think I did a video a long time ago about this, but it's like the move that anyone can do. Like any kind of camera movement is like, oh, a pan or a tilt. Like, oh, it's movement. It's like, no, like move the whole camera, put it on a gimbal, put it on a slider, put it on a jib, or just don't move it at all and have it be static. And like, that looks good too. So yeah, put the R5 up there. It looks a little bit better than that blank Atomos. At least for me, you can't see it, but I can. Canon, let's see. Canon shooters are used to shooting APS-C on full frame. Yeah, that's true. Lowered expectations. I use always external remote monitor, so the R5 would be fine for me, but true, I hope there be some updates. They say now the problem is more the LCD than the battery. I don't know. I don't know what the problem is. I just think the camera wasn't designed properly for proper thermal management. I don't know why. Maybe it was a rush. Maybe it was the order that they did the design in. Like they realized that like they had certain things spec'd out, and then they realized they wanted to cram more in, but they couldn't because the hardware was set. I don't know what the issue is, but it definitely does get hot. And I'm glad they fixed some of the timers and whatnot, which I think is really shady that it didn't come out that way to begin with, because they knew this camera had overheating issues. They told everybody, once it finally was out there, they're like, oh yeah, and by the way, it does overheat, and people start talking about the overheating stuff. But it was very, 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 very soon thereafter that firmware 1.1 fixed, and they're like, oh, now we're going to take accurate temperature readings. Why weren't you doing that before, Canon? Why weren't you monitoring the ambient temperature to know? And if it's really the ambient temperature that matters, well then like what are you so worried about inside that's getting so hot? And if a fan blowing, because I've seen that too, oh, blow a fan on the ports. It's like, that's really going to keep the inside, the sensor cool? Blowing a fan on the side? Doesn't really make sense to me. Is it the card? Is it the battery? Is it the LCD? Like, what is the issue? What is the problem? I can tell you the camera gets hot, it gets warm. I don't know if it's all that dangerous though. I don't know if it's that bad for it to be that hot. I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't know. But it definitely seems like a problem that should have been fixed, regardless of why it is what it is. It is what it is, and it should have been fixed. And I don't think it's a good idea to reward companies for bad craftsmanship. I mean, there's a lot that this camera does great, and that's awesome. If you're a photographer and you just want to take pictures, fine. However, on the video side of things, like, it's a tough pill to swallow. Yes, the autofocus works, but if Canon was the only one doing that, you might have a valid point there. But Sony's doing it too, and their autofocus works well. So why would you go? I mean, if you want the higher resolution photos, for sure. But it's not like you're stuck. It's not like Canon is the only option. You have other choices out there. So I don't know why you would reward this type of engineering when there's other companies doing, I don't know that I can say far better, but they're at least making like it's weird because we go back and forth. New features come out and then everything from the past feels like dated, right? 4K 120 is now just a thing because of the R5 and because of the A7S III. Like no one was doing even 4K 60 properly before that. Like that was a feature, 4K 60, wow, 10-bit in the S1H, but it's cropped. And people weren't even talking about autofocus, right? Because it wasn't that reliable. It's getting there, right? With the Canon stuff and Sony. But now these new, like, the bar has been raised so fast, so quickly in a lot of these things that they just have to, the cameras have to keep catching up from every brand, right? Panasonic has to fix their autofocus. Canon has to fix whatever the overheating situation is. So we'll see what comes next. I'm sure it'll keep getting better and better because like cameras always do, but the R5 could have been awesome and it's just not. Let's see, external monitor, you're waiting for the Silicon IMAX and the MacBook 2. H265 will need GPU support, hardware issues, same thing with H264 when it first introduced. They even gave the C70 a fan, so Canon knows a real video camera needs cooling to work constantly. Yeah, what was something else I saw recently? I think it was in some of the leaked press text for the Lumix S5. There's some talk about overheating, and I don't know why. Is this a thing? Have we been? Is this been in just like hidden in the closet, and now it's finally the boogeyman has come out that like all these cameras can overheat at any moment. We've just been holding on by a thread, and then the R5 was the first one to expose the problem. Like I've been shooting at the GH5. I shot like the S1H does have a fan in it, so clearly they knew something. I guess the people at Lumix knew something, but I don't know. It's just very bizarre that this has now just become this. Granted, Sony, yes, the Sony cameras will overheat from time to time. Although I do think that from my personal experience and what I've heard from other people is usually more like environmental, like you're just in a warm environment, you're out in the sun and the camera gets hot. That was true even for like the 5D and stuff back in the day, which makes sense. If you're in the sun and it's very hot outside and the camera it like gets too hot, of course. But just taking pictures with a camera or just recording in 4K 30 and the camera just overheats and you're like, wait, well, you can't do the basic stuff? Like, I don't understand why it is so crippled. XAVC H is H265, normal is H264, S is if it's move or MXF wrapper, I think. I is all I, and then all the chroma bit rates, etc. is beyond that. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's too much. Probably got something wrong there compared to Blackmagic Pocket Cinema, where it's trivial to understand, and Panasonic, where it's almost easy to understand. Sony are not pushing 45 megapixels, so it should be easier to keep cool compared to the R5. So reliability is my deal breaker. Yeah, Eugene, so whenever someone talks about the 45 megapixels of the R5, always remember the R6 is 20 megapixels and also has the same problems. Also overheats. So it's not, you can't say it's the 45 megapixels. You have to look at the R6 and say that's 20 megapixels and that also overheats. So what's the deal? Is it because they're doing a full sensor readout, you know, like, and they're not cropping, which someone said, you know, if you crop on the R5, it doesn't overheat, which I'll have to test out and see. So sure, because that's what Panasonic has been doing. That's a, you know, Super 35 crop of the full frame sensor. So maybe Sony, it, like the 12 megapixels is like at that sweet spot. But then you wonder, okay, Sony can do 12 megapixels, 4K, 120 frames per second. And that somehow is fine, but Canon's just 4K 30 HQ mode is too much to handle. Like I would have to do the math to see how, like, what the data rates would actually add up to. But like 4K 120, you know, versus 4K 30, and granted you're scaling a sensor differently from like your base resolution of like what the sensor size is and all that. So like you'd have to do the math, but it just seems like odd that the R6 also overheats. I could maybe accept the R5 and say, yeah, 45 megapixels, I'll give them a pass. But then there's the R6, and you go, wait, you couldn't even get the 20 megapixel one right? Like, what's going on here, Canon? It's just a shame. The R5 processor has barely any physical cooling and does pixel binning scaling in processors, so the processor overheats compared to the Ursa 12K that can downscale in sensor or Sony with cooling. Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's the processor, and there have been, you know, the pull aparts of the cameras and stuff and say, oh, they should have done some, you know, better cooling and stuff here. It's like, yeah, they should have. I don't know why they decided it was fine that like just shooting JPEGs. Sorry, you can't see. I'm talking about a camera over here and the chat's in the way. Just shooting JPEGs will warm the camera up. Just shooting, 4K 30 HQ mode will warm the camera up. Like just being in the menus, just having the camera on and standby, it will get too warm for those high-end modes. That is baffling to me. Not that it's a 45 megapixel sensor and it's doing all this high-end stuff. Yeah, I get that. You're talking about just the camera's on in standby mode and it gets too hot. Like, what? That, again, is more of like that defect, or like, this shouldn't have been done this way. There had to be a better way to like keep it cool just as it is, and then, overclock it, right? If you want to use like, PC terms, do like an overclock mode where you can, kind of do these bursts of high-end stuff. Oh, and my internet just died. I don't know. Hopefully everyone can, I don't know if it's coming back, but my bit rate is, oh, it's back. Hopefully, we'll see. Hopefully it maintains. I don't know if that got a little choppy there. We'll see. The joys of doing it live. Let's see. Is it a gentleman's agreement? They all have to choose one cripple, so there's no perfect camera. It must be. Or it must be just that Sony realized that, like, hey, we can do all this amazing stuff if we keep the megapixels low. And also, by the way, we get this amazing benefit of being really good in low light. Hey, that seems like a nice, satisfying trade-off. And those are the kind of trade-offs I like. That's fine. If if Canon said, hey, the R5 does 45 megapixels and it only does 4K 30, but if you want the proper video camera, get the R6, and that's a 20 megapixel one, and that way you can do some like the 4K 60 and that stuff. That'd be fine. Like, I think that'd be fine. It's just like that they're put all these features in here that are attractive, that then like you can't, like, even just the basic regular features cause it to get too hot that you can't even use the high-end modes. And you go, all right, well then I'm clearly going to go to the Sony camera because like that sounds like the better deal of the two. Unless you are a photographer, in which case, if you are just a photographer and you just want to take super high resolution photos, great. Like, then get a Hasselblad. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, get something that I always love that. It's like, oh, you want to shoot video? Well, then just get a video camera. It's like, oh, you want to do photography? Well, then just get a Hasselblad. Like, there is no like, if this, then just get that. Someone left a comment on one of the videos and we were talking. It was basically like, everything is just now in a smartphone. You can take photos, you can take video, you can listen to music and all this stuff. And it's like, if they released a phone that couldn't play music and then someone's excuse was, oh, well, if you want to listen to music, just buy an MP3 player. It's like, that would be dumb. Because you're like, no, the phone does it all. The phone plays MP3s. The phone does all these things. For them to arbitrarily like restrict it. It's like, well, it's a phone. It's not a music player. Like, it should just be a phone. It's like, no, like, we've gotten to the point where all these things are included and they all just work. Like, I don't want to buy an iPod. I want an iPhone that does it all. Why is this hard to understand? And the same is true of cameras, like the hybrid ones, I think, where it's like, yeah, I want the photo features and I also want the video features. And we're very, very close in many of these situations. So just to say, oh, just go buy a video camera is like, well, just go buy an MP3. Just go buy an iPod if you want to listen to music. I bought an iPhone because I talk and I text. I don't need to listen to music. Well, yeah, like, but I like to do both, and I don't want to have two devices to do both. I don't want a phone and an MP3 player. I want it all in one, and I want it to play YouTube, and I want it to, shoot video and photo and all the stuff. The more you can fit in the one device, the more valuable that one device is. Because then it's the thing you can take with you everywhere, which is what, like an R5 should be. 4K 25 is good enough for me, for sure. And if that's all you ever need, that's fine. In which case, I guess if you're doing photos, then yeah, then get an R5. But if you're not, then why not have an A7S III and do 4K 30, but also be able to do 4K 120 if you want. High resolution photos, you can get the A7R2. It feels dated as heck, but the eye autofocus is good for stills and video since 2015, 2016. 45 megapixels, not really special either. That's true. I don't know what's the fastest burst rate on the A7R series. I haven't looked it up. Maybe we should do that real quick. Let's do A7. Sony A7R4 is the newest one, right? what's the fastest you can burst on the A7R4? Going to B&H again, just because I like the way they do their specs. It's just easy to find. Burst. I'm sure someone knows it. They probably already said it in the chat. Continuous shooting up to 10 frames at 61 megapixels for up to 68 frames. Is that... So it's 61 megapixels, which is definitely more, but let's do the A7R3. Which one was the R3 that was around 46 or 45? Let's see. I'm gonna say we've got, yeah, 44 megapixels actual or effective, 43. Okay, so give or take, you're at the same ballpark. Where's our burst mode? Continuous. Where's it at? Did I pass it? I'm sure I did. Oh, continuous up to 10 frames per second. So I think that's the thing, is that like the R5 does 20 frames a second, so that's important for some people, but not for others. It just depends on who you are and what kind of projects you work on. Let's see. The timer is a classic cripple, which they want us to believe is protecting the camera. To prove this, now they're suddenly prioritized thermal monitoring. The timer is all out of whack, yeah. The A7 III downsamples from 6K, has sharp 4K without overheating. Canon must buy a Sony A7S III and look inside what's cooking materials they use. Cooking materials, I mean cooling materials, but the cooking materials is what Canon's using. The cooling materials is what Sony's using. Audio still worked when the video went choppy. Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, I just saw the bitrate just plummet in OBS. I was looking at it for a second, because if I click over here, I can see steady stream, no problems. But for that one split second, it was just like gone. If we reason that Canon have designed the inefficiencies into the R5 and the R6, then we cannot expect them to solve the problem. So I don't think with the R5 and the R6, I don't think they can solve the problem. Even if they wanted to, even if this was if it truly was just like the firmware thing, I know there's people who have tested it, and basically the tests I've seen is that the camera will get to around 65 degrees Celsius, which I think is around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty warm. But it doesn't get hotter than that. So it's not like a linear, just like it keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And if you because it was over on EOS HD, they were talking about, right, if you pull the battery at a certain time, or you do this stuff to kind of reset the timer, like the camera can keep rolling continuously. And they're monitoring it and saying basically, yeah, it gets up to like 60, 65 degrees Celsius, so around that 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and it just kind of plateaus there and just stays. No matter what you're doing, it doesn't get hotter than that. And people will say like, that's fine. Like, I don't know if that's fine or if it's not fine, but I do know that it doesn't get hotter, which is good, that it's not going to literally melt itself if you just keep running it indefinitely. However, the long-term, sustained heat over time, which does make me concerned about, I'm again talking about the camera and you can't see it. The sustained heat over time makes me concerned that, if that is bad for the sensor and Canon is somehow protecting it, right, that it doesn't want it to get too hot in the camera, for some reason, maybe it is bad for the sensor. Even if it is getting warm now and it's reaching those temperatures consistently, right, because even if it cools down, it's going to warm back up because you're going to keep shooting. Is there a long-term effect on the integrity of the sensor, of the components inside? However it was designed, there is some kind of hardware issue not being, maybe the processor isn't, good enough it can't stay cool. Maybe it's the thermal, pastes and pads and heat sinks that they didn't put in the right place or didn't do enough of. whatever it is, I think it is a hardware issue that they are compensating for with like firmware timers and sensor readings with thermometers and whatnot to try and balance all this stuff out. And they've done a better job of that in the 1.1 firmware, but no matter what, it will be an issue because of the hardware. And so whatever they have to do to recoup their costs on this is going to dictate, like, there will be more cameras, right? Canon is going to release more photography cameras. There'll be more full frame cameras. There'll be an R5 Mark II, theoretically, at which point, like, maybe, yes, the problems are all solved and we all celebrate and we're so happy. But right now, it's a really, really tough pill to swallow to say, yes, this is somehow a good camera when it is so fundamentally kind of broken. And I'll say defective in that not just does it heat up in the high-end modes, it heats up in the regular modes, just sitting there in standby. It gets too hot to shoot in the high-end modes, which is really, really frustrating for somebody who wants to use those modes from time to time. I'm not shooting everything at 4K 120. I'm not shooting everything at 8K RAW. But the moment I want it to be there, I don't want to have to think about, well, what have I been doing for the last hour and am I going to be able to do it? Let me turn the camera off for 10 minutes really quick while it sits there and waits. Could I do that? Yeah, I could. And if the R5 was the only option, I probably would, right? We would just say, hey, it is what it is. There's nothing else out there that does this, nothing else has this kind of stabilization and autofocus and all these features. No one else is doing it. So you just kind of have to live with it. That would be fine. But Canon acts like they're in this vacuum, but they're not. There's Sony right there with incredible cameras that are in many ways better and quickly surpassing them in terms of features. And Panasonic isn't far behind either. There's only a couple things they need to fix. And all of a sudden, the Lumix cameras look really, really nice too, because they're so far ahead in terms of video features. So if they fix the autofocus thing and they come out with some more lenses, they're right there as well. So Canon doesn't operate in this vacuum, even though the way they've designed this camera seems like it does, because it's like, well, just take it, it's what we made, you'll like it. And I go, no, but like, I don't have to have this. I could have a lot of other options out there. I don't have to take your overheating nonsense. So hopefully they realize that. Hopefully enough people just kind of say, I'm not spending money on something that's this broken, and they can kind of learn their lesson and hopefully make something better the next go around. Because I would really like for these cameras to be as incredible as they should be. This should be a masterpiece. This should be like one of the all-time greatest cameras ever. And instead it's this half-baked, actually it's more like overbaked camera that just doesn't do what you want it to do. Let's see. Oh, where am I at? Oh, Canon and the A7S III audio still works in the view and choppy. Canon the 1DX Mark III, 5.5 here raw, 4K no overheating. Yeah, and I think on the 1DX Mark III, I think there's like a heat pipe specifically in a certain spot that's not there on the R5. So they probably did some better engineering on that one to make it not be a problem. Don't you just work with the limitation of the camera? No. When you have options and you have choices, I don't just work with the limitations of the camera. I would if the special sauce of the Canon was like so much better and so much greater, but there's many other options out there that are doing very similar things. So you're not limited to having just to deal with it. Not one limitation means you can't shoot video. Yeah, there are other modes than just 4K and 8K. Yeah. I meant cooling. Yeah. So Tenet, thumbs up or thumbs down if you feel like talking about it. Let's talk about Tenet. Well, let me just read the other chat because I'm almost to the end, and then we'll talk about Tenet because I did see it last night. So switch to 1080p. You're joking, right? Are you a filmmaker? Yeah, I'm not even going to touch that one. 1080p, sure, if it works for you, fine. That's fine. I prefer to be shooting everything 4K though. Maybe when you type in Canon, the word cooling automatically became cooking. I agree, it's a hardware problem. They did not design the cameras to be better in working spec than the $28,000 C700. Yeah, if it was like for $4,000. And you got to imagine, right? Some better cooling, just some better, just slightly different design. Because I'll say, I said it, the R5, this feels, right? Like the size and the feel of it feels pretty good. I'd say it's about the right size. It could be slightly bigger. It could be if they were like, hey, you know, we need to add a couple millimeters here or there to keep it cool. Like that'd be fine. If they needed to add a couple extra, you know, heat pipes or some thermal paste or a heat sink, how much cost is that going to add? Is that going to make it, you know, extra $2,000 more expensive? No, of course not. So why didn't they? And that's why people get into the, you know, they're protecting their cinema line and all this stuff. And that's probably true. I can't validate it, but it certainly seems like this should have at least been better thought out and better designed. Because again, it heats up just in standby mode. Just sitting there doing nothing, just in the menus, it warms up. That's unacceptable. Let's see. That's why for me it's purely a stills camera. Yeah, for sure. DP Review forum member uploaded a short R5 HDR PQ clip and it looks sensational. So I've seen in the menu, there's the HDR PQ thing. I have no idea. I need to play around with that. I have no idea what that is. And every time I went to that setting, it was grayed out. So if that's like a 1080p thing, or if that's like, I don't know what mode I need to be in, but if it looks cool, I'll definitely play around with it and test it out. Because it's in the menu, but it was always grayed out when I was going by it. When did 4K become the deciding factor for a filmmaker? I think 1080p is a great resolution. 1080p is a perfectly fine resolution. I think in today's day and age when everything is 4K and above, shooting in 1080p feels like a limitation. The same way that people don't like the 12 megapixels on the Sony a7S III. It feels like a limitation when you have other cameras that shoot 18, 20, 45, 61 megapixels, right? So it's not that it's like you have to shoot it at 4K. Or you don't. You could shoot a film at 720p if you want. You could shoot a film at standard def if you want. But when you have options, you have choices, and you can shoot at 4K or 6K or 8K. You typically, I would think, would want the best of all, right? You want the camera that does really good autofocus if you need it. You want the camera that's got great dynamic range, great resolution, great ergonomics and features and like everything. You want that perfect package, that perfect camera. And it's never going to exist because perfect is different and defined differently by everybody. Some people prefer some things, other people prefer other things. So there isn't like an absolute like right perfect camera, but in general, when almost all the cameras now do 4K and above, it feels like a limitation to go back down to 1080p. The same way that like most cameras now are 13, 14, sometimes 15 stops a dynamic range, right? Above that, you certainly get higher than that with the Red and Alexa cameras. But like, 13 to 15 stops of dynamic range. So like, could you shoot with a camera that's only got 10 stops of dynamic range? You could, and you could probably make something beautiful. And there is no like standard of like, oh, every film has to be at least 13 stops of dynamic range. A lot of scenes don't even have that much dynamic range. But why would you want the camera that only does 10 when you have many other options that do, 13 or 14? So, I mean, that's the situation with like many cameras now. It's just like you go with where the technology progresses. The same thing was what I would say with autofocus. Some people say you don't need autofocus, and that's true. You don't need it. We've been doing manual focus for a long time, but when the autofocus works so well on some cameras but is terrible on others, that's where it feels like a limitation and almost like a deal breaker. Because even if you're not, maybe even if you only use autofocus 5% of the time, you still want that 5% of the time to work really well as opposed to not really working at all. So I just look for what is the best all-around camera that can do basically everything I want to do really, really well. And that would have been the R5, and it still could be. I don't know. I have to play around with it more. This is only like my first day with it and not even a full day, like half a day. So I still have to play around with it some more. But right now I'm feeling like initial reaction when I got my hands on the R5 was like, oh, this feels great. This is so familiar. It feels like a Canon. Like the Canon cameras are so fast and easy to use. And And then the lenses, like if you don't like the Canon lenses, they have some of the best lenses. Granted, some of them are really, really expensive, but like they're just incredible options. And just the look of everything is just so nice, feels good. Going through the menus, this feels good. Shooting photos, wow, this autofocus works really, really well. Hey, look, 45 megapixels. Look how much I can zoom in. Look how sharp that is. That's great. Playing around with video, hey, autofocus works well too. Like all my first initial, reactions are very, very positive. Feels very, very good. Sort of in like kind of like a modern nostalgia sort of way for like, falling in love with Canon again. And then, the overheating thing pops up, the warning, and then, it was just sitting there and it overheated and I can't do this mode and I can't do that mode. And I'm feeling the camera and it's feeling warm and I go, well, this is kind of irritating. And then I'm filming some other stuff, like going around doing photos in the backyard, with the kids, doing some slow-mo stuff. And then, there's that, clock ticking away. Oh, you only have a minute left. Only have 5 minutes left. Oh, you can only do this. And then got to switch to these different modes. And then, you got to power it down so it can actually cool down. And you're just like, oh, yeah, this is a really cool camera that shouldn't have these stupid limitations, but it does, and it like detracts so much from it, from my perspective, because I like doing both. I like doing photo and video. So that hybrid, that, hey, speaking of Tenet, that synergy is just not there on the R5. We'll see if I do fall in love with it, but I don't know. I'm not real enthusiastic about it right now, just because those limitations rear their head pretty quickly, and to me, it's just unacceptable. Let's see. Can just make their honest mea culpa and say, sorry guys, this is what we did. Yeah, they should. The R5 Mark II might include a heatsink, heat pipe, or re-engineer processor for a more power-efficient manufacturing node, immensely more complex, expensive. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think we'll have an R5 Mark II for quite a while. So who knows? Like that should probably be years, right? It's not like 6 months from now we're gonna have an R5 Mark II. So who knows? Then you don't buy an R5 because it's line skipped. A7S III is oversampled 2:1 1080p. Not sure what your point is. $4,000 for a crippled 1080p camera. If Sharp are soon releasing an 8K Micro Four Third camera with full HDMI, can you imagine how great the GH6 will be? I can't freaking wait for the GH6. So another, we'll do it on another stream, another night. I have it here. 1 second. So this is the Leica 10-25. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. Awesome lens. We're going to talk about this with some samples, probably another night, but Micro Four Third lens. Just bought it. So I know people are talking about Micro Four Thirds dying and that being a concern for a lot of people, that, Micro Four Thirds only has a couple more years left. That may be true. I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I think there will be a GH6. I think Panasonic will be completely idiotic not to release one, since the GH5 is so popular. Of course, do a GH6. Of course. Even if it is the last one and there is no GH7. That's fine. Just at least do a GH6. Make your money, Panasonic. Please make your money. So I'm very excited for what a GH6 could have. And the fact that there haven't been a lot of like good, solid rumors about it, to me, makes it seem like, okay, so maybe we're still like 6 months away, but then that theoretically, that's a long time for them to have put like a lot of effort into it. So theoretically, it should be awesome. So that's why I'm even kind of hesitant to like even get like an R5 or an A7S III or anything, like maybe if I need it, but I'm really excited for what a GH6 could be. And if it comes out at the right time, I'll probably buy it. If they take too long, then I'll probably have to buy something else. If it's a situation where it's like, I need to upgrade because the GH5 is just feeling a little stale compared to some things now that we're doing, the high frame rate, like the 4K 120, the autofocus, full frame. Like there's some limitations there that I just can't do with the GH5 in every situation. So at some point I'll have to upgrade, but hopefully I'm eagerly looking forward to a GH6. I think that could be really, really awesome if they put their effort in and fix the autofocus and then come swinging with a bunch of features. Because I don't think Micro Four Thirds is irrelevant in a world where everyone's full frame. I know full frame is a standard in a lot of ways for photographers, but there's a lot of people who just, they don't want the size that comes with the lenses. The bodies, I mean, this is about the same size, like the GH5 and the R5. Like I think they practically are about the same size. And this feels like the right size for the camera body. In fact, it'd be nice if we just standardized to like whatever this size is, the R5, the GH5, like whatever that size is, stick to that. I think the S5, the Lumix S5 is going to be roughly around that size, where like the bigger stuff like the S1H, it's like, no, that's too big. Okay, so we've got this kind of good body size, at least from my perspective. The lenses are where it always becomes, you know, the crazy gigantic full frame lenses are bigger, are heavier. Even though this Leica 10-25, and again, I'm not going to get too into it right now because we'll save it for another night. It's a big lens for sure, but it's not all that heavy. So I do think Micro Four Thirds has a place for those types of people who just want like the travel camera that they can just take with them, and it is smaller, it is more compact, it is lightweight. I don't think it's maybe nearly as valuable as it used to be when, you know, full frame cameras just couldn't do some of the things that they're able to do with the smaller sensor. Now that they're doing, I mean, A7S III is doing 4K 120 from a full frame sensor, like full width. So we're definitely encroaching on that place where the full frame stuff is just equally as good. But maybe the Micro Four Thirds stuff, they can just keep pushing and keep pushing it faster, where you can do 4K 300. Like, I don't know what they have lined up. If they're doing, you know, 6K 120 or 8K 120, like that's valuable for some shooters. So it all just depends on what your priorities are, but definitely looking forward to whatever that might be. Because again, Panasonic would be dumb not to do it. Like, you have to do a GH6. Like, you have a lot of people who will just buy it just because of the GH5 and the GH4 and before it. Like, they have such good momentum with that line, which is hard to say for Panasonic because I can't really think of, you know, many other things in that realm that have performed as well or have been held in such high regard by so many people as the GH5, where you don't quite have that yet with the full frame, like the S series cameras, because yeah, they're full frame, but they're not excelling where the other full frame competition is. But the GH5 did a lot for really low cost at the time, and it's just, I mean, it's what I'm filming with now. Fantastic camera, still love it. So they got to do a GH6. Let's see, cell phones shoot 8K. Yep. Cell phone manufacturers split engineering over much more units. Qualcomm, Apple, Huawei, much more money to optimize tech. Canon does everything themselves. Sony builds their own and others' tech. Yeah, I mean, and cell phones, like, the resolution isn't everything. Don't get me wrong. This isn't a chase for megapixels and then, you know, the megapixel wars or the 8K wars or the 12K or whatever. It's like, it's just another feature on the list. So it's like, if it's got 8K, cool, but how does it look? Is it good 8K or is it bad 8K? And building your own high-end processor and sensors for a single company like Canon must be a challenge. They still could add cooling. Yeah, a camera should not make you feel frustrated. That negative energy takes away from your creativity. I agree, Eugene. Realistically, any DSLR mirrorless body is going to be compromised in some way. A true video camera does not come in the form of a DSLR mirrorless body. I disagree, Alexander. I think a true video camera is... So a true video camera would be what? Like a camcorder? Like a what? Because like Red cameras, like the Red 1 was like a big bazooka looking thing. And then everything since then with the Epic and Scarlett and whatnot have just been little boxes and bricks. I don't know that equates to being like a true video camera. It looks very different than the Ursa Mini. That's much more, it's kind of boxy, but you can rig it out, you know, it's like you put a shoulder rig on it and stuff and you make it more like an ENG broadcast style camera. The Alexa, kind of similar. You've got the S1H is a hybrid style camera that's basically a proper video camera for, I mean, everything you would want is in the S1H, but that's got the form factor of a hybrid. The new Canon C70 also has that kind of smaller form factor. There's the Canon XC10. Was there another? Was there an XC15? There's many different styles of cameras, and I don't know what a true video camera means. I know there's cameras that don't take pictures, but when you're, Blackmagic and you're making a 12K camera that's essentially 80 megapixels, what's the difference? And they're doing that at 60 frames a second. So that is a photography camera that takes pictures, 80 megapixels. But it's not a photography camera. Is it a video camera? Well, it's a cinema camera. Is there a difference between video and cinema? I think this is where it just gets convoluted, and it's like we have these arbitrary terms like video is just moving pictures. That's all it is. A video is just a series of moving pictures. And when the R5 can shoot 45 megapixels, 20 photos per second, that's almost 24 photos per second. Like, it's basically video, right? If you play 20 photos per second back, like, it's motion video. So a proper video camera, does it mean it has XLRs inputs? Because like red cameras don't. You have to have the IO module and like all this other stuff. Does it mean it has built-in ND filters? Well, the Pocket Cinema camera doesn't have built-in ND filters. So like there's no what is the rule for what qualifies like, oh, that's a video camera and oh, that's a photography camera. Like the lines are very, very blurred, and that's why I don't think there is like, oh, a mirrorless hybrid camera will never be a proper video camera. I think the GH5 is a proper video camera. It records continuously. It has no clip limits. The GH4 had the thing where it split the files every like 4 gigabytes. So basically every 4 minutes there would be like another clip, even though it recorded continuously, but you'd have all these clips. The GH5 doesn't do that. You can put basically any lens you want on it. Battery life is really good. You can rig it out and you can build a whole cage like you could for like a Red. It doesn't have the dynamic range, but is that what a video camera is? Something that has 17 stops of dynamic range? Well, there's been video cameras that have far less than that, so it can't be that. Is it the codec that it shoots all eye? Well, the GH5 does that. Is it 10-bit? Well, the GH5 does that. Oh, so it must be like a ProRes or RAW. Well, the S1H does that, and now the R5 does RAW as well. So like there's no set of rules of like what is a photography camera and what is a video camera. I think there are different body styles for different types of shooting, but I think those can apply to both video and photo, because again, video is just moving photos, motion pictures. Moving pictures is all video is. So I think the body style just has to do with like how you like to shoot. And I personally like to be able to pick up a camera and go film with it right away. I don't want to have a block that I can't hold quite right unless it has a side handle, unless I rig it out and do all this stuff. I like the ergonomics of hybrid cameras because it's meant to be held in your hand and you can just go do anything with it. And then if you want to put it on, a rig, you can, but you don't have to. Whereas a lot of the other cameras, it's kind of clunky and awkward to use them without it. So, I mean, there are different cameras that are meant for different things, for sure. Certain cameras are better at certain things than others, but I don't think there's anything as like a true video camera. I don't know what that means. In broadcast, we use camera bodies that cost over $30,000, and they only use 2/3 of an inch sensor, so micro four thirds is not too small. That's true, which I think is a lot of people forget. Like 1/3 inch sensor, 2/3 inch sensor, 4/3 inch sensor. That's what 4/3 is. So very related to kind of like the broadcast standards. This camera, like most of the DSLR mirrorless bodies, are built to be a photo camera first, video second. Exception maybe with the A7S line, but not really. I mean, again, I'd point you to like the S1H. Disagree. Hybrid body with XLR add-on works great. Box form and camcorder form have their benefits too. Yeah, agreed. The form factor is just really what your preference is, but that's fine. Like there's all sorts of different cameras that come in all shapes and sizes, and you can pick whatever works best for you. I don't think cooling is a problem. Some YouTuber gets to shoot 8K, but the heat that the camera's generating is still normal. Many speculate that's a firmware problem. Maybe he got a defective one. I think Canon is limiting its video on purpose. Yeah, that could be. I don't. The sad part is we probably will never know. The GH6 with autofocus plus the 10-25 plus 4K 120 equals golden. With the 10-25, I would rather keep the Micro Four Third around for a little longer, even if I get the A7S III, one of the finest lenses on any mount. Oh, that's excellent. So you have the 10-25 too. Yeah, I just picked it up. I found a good deal on eBay and decided to snag it. And I'm very happy with that 10-25. It's an expensive lens, don't get me wrong. Not as expensive as some lenses, certainly, but compared to the 18-35, like Sigma 18-35 with the speed booster is like the standard on like the GH5, right? That's like what everyone says, oh, this is the combo to get. And it's the combo I've been shooting for the past 3 years because it's fantastic. The Sigma 18-35 with the speed booster, lovely. However, the Leica 10-25 is very, very interesting. And we'll talk about that on another night when we have some examples to go through. You got to pay $4,000 for a lifetime full frame license for the Venice, and you've got to spend over $4,000 to get RAW out of the FX9. So yes, there are lots of trade-offs. A true video camera equals a camera built specifically to be used for video, not photo. But I don't know what that means. Like a box, like a red, like it's so. If the R5 were shaped like a box, that would be a video camera then. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. I embrace whatever camera, whatever shape, whatever size. If it does the job I need it to do, I'm not going to criticize it for not being, something that you didn't make it right. Blackmagic, the 12K Ursa Mini Pro, like 12K 80 megapixels. You're doing it wrong. That's a photography camera because it's 80 megapixels. Like, I don't know. I just think I think hybrids should be used for the jobs that it makes sense to use them on. The whole point of the Komodo, the origin of the Komodo, was that it was designed as like a crash camera for cinema because they were using like GoPros and 5Ds and other tiny little cameras to put them into little small spots. So Red was like, well, we'll make a small camera, that will match better with the high-end stuff. And then they made the Komodo and it turned into what it is now. But the whole genesis for it was just like, let's make a small camera. Well, what's already a small camera? Like hybrids, like photo cameras. And if it's a box and you have a little bit of a bulge on one side, then it's the form factor of photography cameras because that's all they are. They're like a box with a handle on the side. So what can the FP do that the Sony cannot? No EVF, no flip screen, no IBIS, no autofocus, poor battery life. Some people, no matter what, they'll defend their brand, but until you yourself pay $4,000 and you're staring at a camera that won't work properly for your work when you need it, it's a totally different story. A true video camera is where the choice of sensor, processor, and software are optimized for moving picture capture, irrelevant of form factor. The sensor, processor, and software are optimized for moving pictures. Yeah. So like it just stores it stores all the pictures in a nice file format for playback. Like the sensor, right? You're talking about like global shutter versus rolling shutter. Like there's plenty of cinema cameras that do rolling shutter. And like the Komodo is having global shutter is kind of like a unique anomaly now compared to everything else. I think companies must make lenses with T-stops instead of f-stops. What's your opinion? Yeah, I don't know that it really matters all that much. It is beneficial to have T-stops to like actually set proper exposure between different cameras. But for most people who just have one camera, like f-stops are probably fine. Although they do kind of lie to you from time to time. So it's really like test it out. T-stops would be better. I don't know why they do, other than it's just like tradition. And I don't know if it's like more expensive to get a lens rated. They should be doing that anyway, I suppose. And you could probably find it out. I wonder if there's a site that does that, where you can check like the t-stops of every lens. I'm sure there's somebody out there who does that. So I don't think it'd be a bad thing. I think it'd be good to do both. And at the end of the day, f-stops don't really matter as much as t-stops do. But again, usually most of the time they're pretty close. So it's not a hill I'm going to die on. I think there's more important things to fight over. In the end, this has been a great review. R5 is indeed a great photo camera with excellent photo and video specs. Too bad the overheating limitation on the video is a bit of a bummer. It is, Steve. It is a bit of a bummer because it could have been so great. Very few of the camera wanting to look like DSLR mirrorless body. I think the C series, Canon FS series, and Sony stuff are good examples. Yeah, I mean, there's bigger cameras that become, you know, like that cinema video camera type thing because they're bigger. But in a lot of ways, I find the bigger form factor a limitation in certain regards. And I'm certainly happy to do the trade-offs, right? I'm willing to accept that, you know, they can't cram ND filters into a tiny little camera body. It just doesn't fit. Or XLR ports, definitely. But for me, that's not... it's a trade-off I'm willing to make because of the benefits I see from the smaller size. I think you can move a little faster. I think you can do things a little bit better in certain situations. And then there are other times where I take out the Ursa Mini Pro because that's better in other ways too, right? Like it's the dynamic range, the built-in NDs, the built-in XLRs, like all of that is valuable. And it's a little bit bigger, has fans in it. Like, okay, it's a proper cinema camera. But at the end of the day, if you're shooting video on a GH5 or an Ursa Mini Pro, that's just how you're acquiring the footage. So there's pros and cons either way, any way you want to look at it. But at the end of the day, you're still making video content for somebody to consume. And most of the time, those consumers aren't going to know the difference of what it was shot on. They're not going to care. They're just consuming the video content. And if you shot it with a GH5 or you shot it with an Ursa Mini or you shot it with an iPhone, it's still just a video in their feed, on their phone, on their laptop, TV, wherever it's at. And your regular everyday person isn't concerned about how it was shot and what camera and was it a real video. Did they shoot this with a real video camera? If it looks good, if it sounds good, if it tells a story, I don't think they care. Let's see. I hope they'll fix it in their second batch. Yeah, I've said that before. The R5 would be better than many cinema cameras if it didn't overheat. Image quality is phenomenal. There's some people who have been talking about the dynamic range in the R5, the dynamic range in the R5 not being all that great. I have to see, kind of play with it, see how it feels and how it looks. I probably won't do anything too scientific, other than just kind of shoot with it and see how it performs. But that has been the one thing I've heard, that like the dynamic range of Canon is not as good, but we'll see. Panasonic, get your act together, waiting on GH6. Give us something small, like a spec you've been waiting for yeah. We've been waiting forever for some news. Yeah, like let us know what's coming with the GH6. I imagine 8K on the R5 is likely less taxing on the processor, at least if you can disable HDMI output. No scaling needed for 8K, so less processor work ought to be needed. More bandwidth to card needed, though. The R5 has the best video image quality of any... What's MILC? Camera? I don't know. What about editing that 8K 422? I haven't edited any of the video yet. Forget about editing. What about storage? Yeah. Yeah, the 8K RAW for 256 gigs is 12 minutes. So, look, like, that's just insane. Of course, they can be used as video cameras and should. I mean, they're just speaking to judging the video limitations, mistakes by Canon. Oh, see, Alexander, so I'm not saying that the R5, you know, the limitations or whatnot. It's the camera gets hot just sitting there. That's not doing video. That's not doing nothing. It's just sitting there warming up. So whatever they did, they should have done it differently to just baseline, not be getting near what they've deemed, you know, this some threshold of, you know, some danger zone for temperature. The baseline for the camera is essentially at that threshold. So the way they've designed the camera. They design a camera with a baseline that is their threshold. Okay, I would never recommend you do that. You should always design any electronics, whatever. Your baseline should be cool, right? Your phone, your computer, everything should run cool. And then if you need, to render something, then it bumps up to like your high spec, like, oh, now we're working, now we're trying hard, and then we're back down, right? Your phone, like, oh, you're just making phone calls and texting, no big deal. Oh, you want to play some game, some 3D game on your phone, and boom, now we're up here to like where it's running warmer. The R5 seems designed in such a way that just the baseline is warm. So then you're trying to push it to do these like higher end features that they've built into the camera. And they say, oh no, you can't do that. It's too hot. It's too hot. It's too hot. It's like, well, you set the baseline this high. Why is the baseline so high? Why is it just being on warming it up? Why is me shooting JPEGs already at this threshold? That does not make sense. It should be down here. And then when I click into that mode, it should bump it up. When I click into the, these high-end modes, or I tax the system, and that's a situation where like it makes sense. It's a photography camera, and it's not a proper video camera, so sure, that makes sense. But I'm saying when the baseline is already at the threshold of, kind of concerning performance, that is not a video or photo or hybrid or video cinema camera. It's just a general thing about the camera that seems broken and defective, and it should not be that way. I don't know why it's that way. Maybe they can fix it, but probably not. It seems like a hardware limitation that, for whatever reason, they thought it was acceptable. For me, I find it unacceptable that the baseline is right at that cusp of it being too hot to do anything above and beyond. Like, it's just shooting JPEGs. You're just in a menu. Like, it's just a live feed from the sensor. We've had live feeds from sensors since the 5D Mark II. And was that a 20 megapixel sensor? And people would say, oh, it's the megapixels. They're processing all these megapixels. It's like, I don't know that's the thing. I think there's plenty of ways to do that and for it not to be running hot as it is. Let's see. Judging limitations as mistakes, I meant. No, I think the mistake is just that it is just running warm. My surfing GoPro C camera costs 35 euros. It's a pull-less case for diving for the iPhone XR. My surfing GoPro C camera costs 35 euros. It's a pull-less case for diving for the iPhone XR. Oh, it's okay. So you use your iPhone as basically as a GoPro. That's cool. The Pen 15 Red Komodo. Thoughts? Red Komodo, I think it's neat if you're into red cameras. I think it's a little bit overpriced compared to what other options are out there. At a certain point, Red was the only one doing what they were doing, and now you've got companies like Blackmagic that are just making phenomenal products and entire workflows, like start to finish, that are really smooth, really streamlined. I mean, it's hard to justify the cool factor of Red cameras. The brand is cool. They're marketing, like they make cool looking stuff, and they're very good at that branding component of just making like, it's a cool camera because it's a Red. I don't think anyone's ever looked at like a Blackmagic Ursa Mini and been like, whoa, like such a cool camera. Like Blackmagic is a very like AV techie company. They don't do a lot of that's like cool with their brand. Although with a name like Blackmagic, like they probably could. So it's just their style. Like the styles are different, but the end product, like does the style of the brand matter? Like, do you argue over like Nike or Reebok or Adidas, or do you just buy the shoes that like you like that work for you? Oh, but Nike, whatever, or Reebok, oh, Adidas, oh, this, whatever. It's cars are the same way. Oh, Ford is cooler than Chevy. Oh, that's not as cool as Toyota. That's not as cool as whatever else is out there. It's like Dodge. Oh, there's like a cool factor is like marketing, the functionality of the camera. I find the Blackmagic stuff more appealing for people who are budget conscious, right? And I think that's most people. No one wants to spend a bunch of money on stuff if they're worried they're not going to make their money back. There are some people who invest in red because they can justify it and it will make their money back. But I think a lot of people, it's a disservice to recommend and say, hey, you need to buy, like if you're going to shoot, this is the, I don't think anyone actually says this, but it can be easy for it to be interpreted this way. New filmmakers, new creators, new people who want to get into video or who want to get into video production and they want to create content. It can be easy to feel like to be professional, you need a Red or you need an Alexa or you need a C500 or a C700 or whatever, you know, the real video camera is or the professional camera is. Meanwhile, ignoring the cheaper alternatives out there that are probably the more responsible choice, especially if you're just getting into it or you don't have a lot of money and resources and it's not worth the risk of, you know, kind of rolling the dice on an investment in a Red when like you could get a Blackmagic or a Z-Cam or whatever else, a Kinefinity, and do just fine, the same level of output. Because if you're newer or you're just getting into it, like it's more about like establishing your portfolio and getting clients and making connections and building your network and growing your business more so than it is about like, are you shooting with the coolest camera? It does matter to some extent because there are some clients who will care or will, you know, ask and that's just like the marketing that's behind it, right? Because Reds have been used for Hollywood feature films. So if you have a Red, oh, you must be a Hollywood filmmaker. That's not true. Anyone who has money can buy anything. So just because someone, like, you know, if someone bought, I don't know, like a really expensive sports car, it doesn't mean they're a good driver. Just because you have an expensive Red camera doesn't mean you're a good filmmaker or a good DP or a good director. It's just something you bought because it costs money. Do the good people tend to buy more expensive stuff? Yes, that's true. But there's also really rich people who aren't very good at buy things as well. So that's only to say I wouldn't recommend the expensive stuff just because like at this point, it's not, the value isn't as immediate as it used to be. When RAW and high frame rate and 4K and dynamic range, like these things were, you know, very elusive. Red was doing it and no one else was. That was a time where it's like, yeah, you mean if you can afford it, like you probably should. Now it's kind of more like, I'd say opt for whatever you can afford. And if you can afford a Komodo and that seems like the right choice, get it. Like I'm sure it's a great camera. But if it feels kind of expensive, there's plenty of other options that are much more affordable that will probably do you just as well. Let's see. An example of a sensor that is more suited to video over another is how the GH5S sensor has better dynamic range, low light, and color than the GH5, but is worse for high-res stills. That's true. But I would say that dynamic range, low light, and color are also valuable for photo as well. Because like resolution is just like one component. So like the dynamic range, low light, and color are also important for photo. So I don't know that I totally agree with that exactly. 48 minutes of RAW for 1 terabyte. Ouch. Is that how the math adds up? Probably. Being on the outside, we don't know when production processor body firmware was done or if the R5 even has the processor it was intended to have. Could have been Project Mayhem. Exactly. We won't know behind the scenes, and maybe it'll come out someday, but it won't be anytime soon. And there's a lot of that stuff in product design where certain things have to happen in a certain order, and if certain decisions are made and then other decisions are made later, that may be a restriction on due to the earlier things. So like they could have had the hardware all designed and then realized, hey, we want to put all these high-end specs in there for video to like stand out and get, you know, marketing buzz out there. And then they're like, well, we can't do that. It's going to overheat. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, let's implement these like timers and sensors and thermal management via software. And then people clearly rejected that and said, this is nonsense. I'm shooting in my freezer and it's still overheating. What's going on? And so they're constantly juggling things like any company is. So it's definitely not one answer. There's not one reason why it is the way it is. It's a combination of factors. That's always true. It's never just one thing of why. And it's also true that it's probably a lot of good intentions met with bad decisions, met with timelines, restrictions, budgeting, all those things always add up into what results in, you know, problems. It's very rare that things are, you know, done perfectly or really, really well. I said I was going to talk about Tenet, and I still will, but I'm still going through the chat here. It just keeps going. I've been part of so many engineering projects going not great. Yeah, it's complicated. It's not easy. An example of software that is more suited for video is how Panasonic has video tools that no other hybrid comes close to. Blackmagic has even better UI, but it's more suited for video. That's true. Most of the YouTubers I know who own several cinema cameras and hybrids rarely shoot RAW anyhow. They get what they need shooting 10-bit log for most projects. Yeah, RAW is helpful if you need it, but also not as valuable as maybe some people make it out to sound. A camera with a new body, sensor, processor developed in-house is such a huge project with so many sub-deliveries, and customer electronics project always mayhem. I don't think a YouTuber shooting RAW for sure. I'm thinking film or TV broadcast for small productions. Should camera companies make a ProRes option inside of the camera? So I would love it if they just made codecs that were easy to edit, which ProRes is one. So I don't think it has to be ProRes, because I know there's licensing to Apple with ProRes because Apple developed that codec, but ProRes just works, and it's pretty universal. I know there's maybe some issues with Windows machines, so, but even like, you know, MOV, MP4, H.264, if they can figure out the H.265 stuff and make it kind of play nice, like, the benefit of ProRes is just that it works so well. But I will say Blackmagic RAW works just as well as ProRes does. So, and that's a RAW codec. It is compressed, but the ease of editing is just as smooth as ProRes on my machine. And my machine's not brand new or high spec or anything. So there's ways to do it. I think it's just having the right I don't know. I don't know how it's done, how they design the codecs, but I definitely know there are certain codecs like MXF, for example. Like, I hate MXF. I don't know what they do, why that's even a choice or why it's an option, because I've never had MXF files play nice with anything I've ever edited. And I know that's a wrapper, so it's probably like that's, but whatever they're choosing to wrap as MXF, whatever the underlying, whether it's XAVC, HD, AVS, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, playback is the most important thing for editing, because like you can have the best files, but if it's a chore to edit them, you're probably going to go with something, another camera. And I don't know, ProRes does work really well, so I wouldn't be opposed to it being inside cameras, more of them anyway. I would buy the R5 and glass in a heartbeat if it didn't overheat, but I still think it's a good camera. Michael, that is exactly how I feel. I would buy the R5 and the glass in a heartbeat if it didn't overheat, but I still think it's a good camera. That's a good way to put it. Put the but at the end. You know, say, I don't want to buy it, but I think it's still a good camera. The ATEM Mini Pro teardown gives amazing insights into Blackmagic design. One PCB seems to have been used since ATEM Mini and has the buttons, etc. for ATEM Mini Pro, ISO, spare slots for more memory, etc. Is that a video link you can share? I'd be curious to check that out. Most of them shoot professionally, but not for Hollywood, real estate, weddings, product photography, music videos, documentary, etc. Wonder how many R5s will be returned. Probably quite a few. Designed to be able to release without all features being done, being able to add, remove features when finalizing projects. Oh, that's cool. An example of processors that are more suited to video are those that are chosen to perform at the needed efficiency for the chosen specs and can run reliably in the design camera form. The R5 fails. Yeah, they should have done a better job. But let's talk about Tenet, because this is just random talk. It's getting late. We'll wrap this up. But I did see Tenet last night, so I didn't stream. I was planning on it, being back from my week-long vacation up north. I was like, oh, let's get back to streaming, start Monday. We can, I don't know, talk about something. Whether it's the 10 to 25 Leica lens, whatever. But I was like, oh, let's go see Tenet. I don't know if I should talk about spoilers. I'll avoid spoilers at this point, because I'm sure people will bail. They'll say like, oh, I haven't seen it yet, I want to leave. But I won't spoil it. I don't know how to describe it. It's not good. It's not bad. I enjoyed it, but there were also parts I didn't like about it. How do I do this in a live stream, off the cuff, talking about Tenet without spoiling it for people who still want to see it? I would recommend, here's what I'd recommend for Tenet. Go see it. It's worth watching. Don't get frustrated by it. It's very, in the beginning, it's very confusing, intentionally so. It never really gets clarified, a lot of the stuff that's confusing. It's not like it's hard to understand. It's just like the writing, the way it's written is not meant for clarity. If anything, we've talked about this a few times now, but Primer, the movie Primer, Tenet feels like Christopher Nolan watched Primer and then said, hey, I could do something like that. That's what Tenet feels like to me. A lot of people have said Tenet is like James Bond or a spy movie, and it is, but the core concept, as most Nolan films have, is very, it's conceptual. It's this kind of like plot-driven, minimal character stories, just like plot around some really cool concept. Which, if you've seen the trailers, you know the Tenet, it's all about this like time inversion. I would say it's worth watching. If you've seen Primer, it feels very similar, but maybe not in obvious ways. It's just like it's all I could think about the whole time was like, this reminds me of Primer. This reminds me of Primer. This reminds me of Primer. But it is very different, and it is worth seeing. But it's not a masterpiece. It's not even necessarily a great film. It's a very cool film. It's very well done. It's a very like technically proficient film, but I don't think it's a great film. I'll have to watch it again to know for sure. So I wouldn't like write that in stone of like that's why I say it's not bad, but it's not great either. There's just some clunkiness about it where, and that's what I kind of find most often with the Nolan films, that when the concepts are too grand or too big, it's very hard to write around it because he's trying to explain these just cool concepts of just like interesting things. Like what if time worked this way, or what if space travel worked this way, or what if, dreams worked this way. They're really cool concepts, but to write movies around them in meaningful stories with meaningful characters and interaction and dialogue is a really big challenge. And I think if I had to guess, I think that's what Nolan does. I think he has these concepts that he writes stories around rather than having stories he wants to tell that he injects cool concepts into. And I think if anything, that would be my criticism of some of his recent stuff, and probably a criticism of like the way I usually think about films too, is like, oh, a short film, it'd be really cool to do a short film like this, or around this kind of cool like technology, like using a feature on a camera or using a feature in editing. I think that's what a lot of people do. We look at like we could do this cool thing, and then we come up with stories out of that aren't always great stories. And so the tech might be cool, the execution might be cool, the concept might be cool, but it's still we're lifting up these kind of mediocre stories. I think the better way to do it is think of the cool tech, think of the cool concepts, think of all the cool stuff, set it aside, put it on a shelf, and then focus on like, what's a good story to tell? And a lot of them are more or less rehashed, like there's only 40 stories or something like that. But focus on the stories first. What are the characters? What drives them? What motivates them? Who are they? What are their personalities like? What do they enjoy? What is the mix? What do these people do together? And then inject the concepts into that. Find the story first and then pair it with a concept. Don't find the concept and then try and cram a story into it. Because I think that's kind of what Tenet feels like, and kind of what Interstellar feels like. Inception's maybe a little bit better of a one, but the thing with Inception was that it was always said like, oh, this has been, they've been working on it for 10 years. For 10 years we've been working on Inception. Where like you don't really have that same marketing push with this new stuff. It's not like this idea for Tenet has been, been worked on for the past 10, 15, 20 years. It seems like a relatively like, oh, it was another film to make after Dunkirk, right? That's the last Nolan film. And which I didn't see, by the way. I probably should get around to seeing it at some point. But I would recommend Tenet. I would say check it out, see it, watch it. It's good, but I think there's some valuable lessons there for just other people if you're interested in filmmaking and making your own stories, making your, like, concepts are great, plot is really cool, but like the story still has to be strong as a story. And I think a lot of that can be inspired by stories that have worked well over the years. I mean, that's one of the main criticisms of Star Wars, the initial one, is that, oh, it's a rehash of all these previous stories. But like that's also what's so great about it. It's taking stuff that's worked time and time again and making it relevant for a new audience, making it different with new characters and new plot points and inside a new universe, but still telling a really compelling, great story. And I think that's what can get easily lost in some of the tech behind the scenes. Oh, we're shooting on IMAX, or we're building it's all done in camera. We crashed a plane. All very cool. Looks great. Of course, there's issues with the score, as many people have pointed out. With Tenet, the music is awesome, but it's very loud at certain points, and it's very hard to hear what the characters are saying at certain times. So that's frustration, as well as combining that with confusing and convoluted dialogue just makes it, like I said, kind of frustrating. So don't get frustrated within the first like hour, because you probably will be. You'll be like, what is going on? Like, I don't know what is happening and why this stuff is happening. You kind of just go with it. And there's even a line in the film. It's in the trailer. It's just like, don't think about it too much. Just go with it. Like, that's what I'd recommend. Just go with it. And then I think by the end, you'll probably enjoy it by the end, but you also walk away saying, yeah, that could have been better. It probably should have been better. Maybe it is similar to the R5 in that way. It's like, it should have been awesome. Should have been perfect. Should have been this really cool thing. And then there's parts that are really good and like phenomenal, in fact. And then there's other parts that are just kind of like, oh, ooh, that's not that great at all. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Alexander says, I'm really thinking the R5 is a test unit for Canon, betting big that we'll see an RF mount C-series camera in the near future with that sensor in it or something based on it. Oh, I'm sure, and I'm sure it'll cost more, and that's the frustration with Canon. You prefer an Atomos external recorder or Blackmagic external recorder? Interesting. So what is Blackmagic up to nowadays? So the video assist was great, but it had some limitations. Actually, I should go to just their site. Blackmagic design. So the video assist, let's see if I can find it here. Which would it be under? Gosh, their site. It's just so AV. Studio film converter. That's not what I want. I want the video assist. Why am I not seeing it? Video and audio monitoring. Here we go. Smart View 4K. No, that's not what I want. Here we go. Video assist. So the one thing I like, first of all, the video assist, I have to see, are they still running it on Canon LP E6 batteries? Because that was the thing. The video assist, when I had the first one, it ran on LPE6 batteries, which didn't last long enough. Even with 2 in there, it just is not a big enough or powerful enough battery to run the thing. And so the Atomos running on the Sony batteries makes a lot more sense because you can actually run it portable for far longer. However, one thing that I don't know which Atomos has so many different brands and styles. One thing I really liked about the video assist that I can't do on my Atomos is it can't record ProRes proxy. And this is something that Blackmagic puts in the Ursa Mini and on the video assist, but like is not on the Atomos stuff for some reason, at least not on the devices I've used. You can't record ProRes proxy, which you might say, oh, who would want to record ProRes proxy? Like that's awful. But in 4K, it's actually not. And if you are doing long form stuff and you need just to fill a lot of space with footage, ProRes proxy a lot of times can work fine, especially if you're not going to do a heavy color grade, if it's not a super fine detailed scene, and you don't need like those high data rates. that some of the, better ProRes codecs will do, ProRes proxy can work fine in 4K in certain situations. So just having that option in the video assist I really liked, but I didn't like the batteries, and I didn't also, I liked it at the time that it recorded to SD cards, but now that SSDs have become a lot cheaper and they're obviously much bigger, I don't actually know, it seems to always kind of, there are big SD cards as well, but like in general, it's probably better to record to an SSD nowadays than maybe, what was that, 4 or 5 years ago that the first video assist came out, and it was like, hey, great, I can use, SD cards because I'm using them in the camera. I'll use them in the video assist. It'll be fantastic. Now I think I'd prefer an SSD setup, but I don't know if that's if they've switched on the video assist, if they are SSDs now, or if they're still, no, they're still SD cards. Uninterrupted recording. Yeah, ProRes proxy. So like that, so see, I can do 190 minutes. This is 4K 256. So like you can get a lot of footage on there with proxy, whereas on the Atomos, I think you're usually limited to ProRes LT. Let's see. I do like that there's both the HDMI and SDI, but I believe the Atomos ones have kind of consolidated that as well. I'd have to really compare monitor to monitor, but I do like the menu. The menu for the Blackmagic stuff is great. You can record direct to external USB-C media disks. Oh, that's cool. So you can sort of have an SSD, but it doesn't like dock in like it does on the Atomos. I don't know. I think they're probably both great. I'm not a huge fan of Atomos. They're fine, but I like Blackmagic as a company better, I think. I think they make more interesting products overall, and they're just a little bit more streamlined. Atomos seems to just like have so much stuff, but I know that people really like the Ninja 5, so, and I haven't used that one, so I can't really talk to it that much. That big piece of glass looks so nice on the R5. That's a nice looking camera. Congrats. Oh yeah, no, it's just a rental. Just a rental. Didn't buy it. A good film or music in the start must be an honest, passionate story you want to tell. Yeah, it's got to be a good story first and foremost. You're close to the truth. They must have realized long before release the platform needed more cooling, and Canon often share base platforms between cinema and photo. I edited some 10-bit S-Log3, 240 frames per second footage from the A7S III today. It was very easy for my MacBook Pro. It's a world of difference from the 8-bit 420 footage from before. Big difference. Yeah, I'm very excited for the A7S III. I think that's going to be the camera to beat, at least, right now. Of course, though, cameras always do get better, and Sony will have an A7S IV, theoretically, or they'll have an A7 IV that may be better in some ways. Canon will have an R something that maybe will be better in some ways. Lumix will keep coming out with cameras, both full frame and micro four third. Fuji's going to keep coming out with cameras. They've got their, Fuji's got medium format cameras that shoot video as well. So like things will just keep getting better. So only buy something if you need it at the time, because then you won't regret it later. If you buy something just to have it, something better is going to come along, and then you're going to regret what you bought. And you're going to say, oh, but it's not the best anymore. I should have waited. I should have waited. And that's the inevitable, your smartphone. Just use it until it's like broken, and then once the new one comes out, then buy that one. That's kind of my philosophy on it. It's like wait till the bitter end, and then once the new thing comes out, then get it that has meaningful upgrades. Like right now for me personally, those meaningful upgrades would be autofocus. I don't think I'm going to buy a new camera that doesn't do really good autofocus in video. I also am not going to buy a camera that, shoots, that can't reliably shoot at least 4K 60. Ideally, it can do 4K 120 though. Like that's kind of the new, but I don't need that. If it was 4K 60, okay, great. And probably looking at something that, probably look into full frame. I said I'm excited about the GH6, and I am. I am really excited about the GH6. But right now, I also really would prefer something full frame, just for that extra flexibility and variety. And like the size of the bodies doesn't really matter anymore because they're all about the same size, more or less. And it feels like that time of like, okay, picking the right system to invest in. Because if it was just about lenses, I'd go Canon all day, every day. They have the best lenses. If you like just the fact they have a 28 to 70, so this is the 24 to 70, 2.8, but they have the 28 to 70, that's f2. You know, like an f2 zoom lens, 28 to 70 covers basically all your, focal lengths that you would want, more or less, just every day running around taking photos. And then of course you can do the 24 to 105. You have just so much variety. Like they have some of the fastest lenses, like the 1.2s. I don't think Sony has all that many super fast lenses. And a lot of the Canon lenses are also stabilized, which a lot of the Panasonic ones aren't and the Sony ones aren't. So there's just more options. There's expensive ones, there's cheap ones, there's like runs the spectrum. And Canon also probably holds its resale value a lot better, just because the market share is so big. So like if the R5 was like the camera that I wanted, right? Investing in the RF glass would make a lot of sense. And then investing long term in Canon, because you know that people are going to want to buy the stuff even if you're done with it, you can sell it again. Whereas a lot of the other camera brands kind of lose that value because like a new Sony camera comes out and all the old ones just get dumped, and it's not as many people looking to buy Sony cameras. They're growing in market share, but definitely even fewer on the Panasonic Micro Four Thirds side. So if you're looking at it as like an investment to where you want to like sell it then later, I think Canon makes a lot of sense. If you're looking purely at the lenses, Canon makes a lot of sense. They own the market, and for good reason. They make good lenses, and there's a lot more photographers out there than videographers. I think, I'm pretty sure. It seems like there's a whole lot more anyway. Professionals, I don't know, but there's definitely more people just taking pictures. So it makes sense that they design cameras for photographers, but it would have been really nice if they had just figured out some of the heat issues with this camera, because then I think they would have made everybody happy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that from a marketing standpoint, sales standpoint. Like, what's the problem with making like the best camera you can? If you know there's a problem, the overheating, right? Everyone knows it's a problem. Canon knew it was a problem. We all know it's a problem. It's an issue. How severe that issue is depends on the individual, but we can at least admit that it is a problem. If you know it's there, why not take the time? Why not try and fix it? And I'm sure there's all the reasons they couldn't, but we can at least say that they should have, right? I think that's fair to say they should have done it better. They should have made it at least understandable of why it gets like I understand if it's 45 megapixels and it can only shoot so much in a certain mode, but why is it baseline so hot? Why is just in standby in the menus running hot? Why? That should have been fixed. That should have been addressed to where you could just shoot video with the camera more reliably. And I think that's the biggest issue for professionals who want to use it for the video features that are there, like the excellent autofocus and for the photo capabilities. It's just saying like, I want to be able to rely on this. I want to be able to depend on my camera to do the job I need it to do and not question every 30 minutes whether I need to turn the camera off to reset itself. Why are there still recording time limits of 30 minutes for video clips? Like, why is that a thing? Why does that need to be there on a photo camera in 2020? It just doesn't make sense anymore. So there's a lot about this camera that I wish they had just polished it and made it that much better, because it would have made so many more people happy, and I think they would have sold far more units. I think they would have won a lot of acclaim from many people. Like, who would badmouth it? What would we complain about? What would there be to complain about the R5? The price? Oh, it's a little bit expensive. Okay, but like I think we all understand like the features of this camera justifiably come with a higher price point. So you want to say what's the issue? That it doesn't have C-Log 2 or C-Log 3, or that the raw files are really big, or like that's all fine, but like right now as it is, like this camera has made a lot more enemies, and it's made a lot of friends too, I'm sure. But I don't think those are people. Canon had people lined up to buy this camera, and there's been the diehard Canon fans who have RF lenses and they were going to buy this camera anyway. So they got those people, but there were a lot of people who were on the fence, and they could have had them, but I think they lost them by the way they designed this. Back in the chat, and then I'll wrap it up because it's getting late. I edited some 10-bit. Yeah, we saw that. A10 Mini Pro ISO is a great tool. I got it a few days ago and it's great. 5 ISO tracks, a video, and a DaVinci file already edited from your live stream. Love it. I wait with buying the R5. I stay with Canon, but I'll see what is coming with firmware updates for the R5 and the R6, and I'm waiting for the RF20 and 24mm primes. Yep. Canon has the best glass, 100% man. I love their glass. Yes, they do. The A7S III for a day, so I was able to fill up my SD card footage. Canon might be the best, but I just picked up the Sony 20 1.8, the Sigma 85 1.4, and the Sony 185 1.8, and they're awesome, and the total was a little more than one Canon lens. Yeah, now that's true. Like, Canon does come with a price tag. And there's a lot of times where you don't need a 1.2, right? You don't necessarily need an f2 zoom. I just think it's cool that there are options and they make these kinds of lenses, these kind of premium luxury lenses for like the cool factor. I mean, with modern cameras and the ISO values that you can get up to, f4, you know, if you do like a 24 to 105, that's f4, that's probably the lens I'd buy with modern cameras, just because your ISOs like can go so high and you don't need the super crazy low light like wide apertures that you used to need. And you know, the depth of field at f4 is actually has stuff in focus compared to, you know, like 1.2 where it's gonna be really shallow. But it's a certain look that you might want to go for from time to time. So it just really depends. But I think if it's a 1.4, 1.8, f2, 2.8, like they're all gonna do you just fine. I'm a little worried about the noise and sharpening. The 135, I was like, the 185, I had to like read that twice. I'm like, the 185, there's a 185 1.8. Okay, news to me. I need a 1.2. I need, yeah. All right, I'll end it there. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully it was helpful. Maybe not. I don't know. It's just another person on the internet talking about the Canon R5. But I at least wanted to get my hands on it, test it out for myself. I really do love shooting with it, and that's why it makes it all that much more depressing that it just doesn't shoot as much as I'd want it to. The fact that it has these overheating issues is just beyond... It's just beyond, like... It should not be acceptable. And I would say right now, my recommendation on this camera is don't buy it, because I think bare minimum, it's not worth rewarding Canon for the kind of bad job they did. I think that type of behavior, if lack of a better word, right, from a company is just unacceptable, and it shouldn't be rewarded. It shouldn't be something that we say like, oh yeah, we'll deal with the restrictions, we'll deal with the limitations. No. We should spend money on tools that do the job we want them to do. And if companies are going to think they can cut corners or make sacrifices or protect their cinema line or make mistakes, or just maybe they were dumb, I don't know. But whatever it is should not be accepted. It should not be allowed to happen again. And that's why I would hard recommend, yeah, don't buy this camera right now until Canon either comes clean and tells us what was going on, fixes it with firmware, or I don't know. But I don't think... We wouldn't accept this in any other industry. Or maybe we would. I don't know. But like, you should buy from the companies who are doing their best, not from the companies that are doing what this has become. Because I don't think this is Canon's best. I think they could have done a better job on the video side. maybe that would have been more expensive. Maybe it would have been too much effort. Maybe it didn't make sense with their roadmap, or I don't know. But I just think in its current state, it's unacceptable that we even have to deal with these problems and we have to even talk about them. Because I'd rather be talking about stuff like the RAW files being massive, you know, an 8K RAW, and wow, they're coming out with RAW Lite, and isn't that awesome? Isn't that amazing? And then we can talk about who needs 8K and who needs RAW, and but the fact that we have to talk about just like the camera just being limited and not even be able to use the modes you want to use, and then just all the weirdness around it, I just don't. It doesn't give me good vibes. I'd rather give money to Sony and be paying for a product like the A7S III that's actually seems to be, like, I don't know, I can't recommend it, right? I haven't shot with it myself, but that seems to be more of a, we tried our hardest, we did our best, we put thought and effort into all the aspects of this camera, rather than sacrificing the video capabilities for what? For the sake of photographers? Like, I don't think they're separate. I think there's a lot of overlap there where both would be equally happy with accommodations they could make. And, you know, maybe it's the difference of, maybe it's a 38 megapixel sensor, or maybe it's a, you know, the burst rate is, I don't know, a little bit lower. I don't know what the solution is. I don't have all the answers, but I know that the problem is that this camera is not up to the task of doing what a lot of people would like it to do. And that is the unfortunate thing. It's a joy to shoot with. It's a lot of fun. When it works great. And that's the biggest disappointment, is that it just doesn't work as much as you'd want it to. So I'll end it there. I'll talk to y'all later. And I hope, for me, it's good night. Maybe for you it's good morning. In that case, good morning. Have a great day. If you're going to bed like I am, have a great night. And we'll talk later.